We all know that people can be narcissistic, but did you know that churches can be narcissistic as well? That's exactly what we're talking about on today's episode of the Church Disrupted podcast. We're going to talk about narcissistic churches, how they become narcissistic, what it looks like, the systems that lead to it, and what we can do about it. Narcissistic churches do a lot of damage, but the good news is they're fairly easy to spot once we know what we're looking for. But just like narcissism in people and churches comes on a spectrum. So a lot of times it's not as simple as saying, is this church a narcissist or not? It's more of a question of, is my church or this church being narcissistic in their approach, in their systems, in such a way that's hurting people and getting them off mission. So we're going to talk about all of that and more in today's conversation. If you are a part of a church or checking out churches, or you've ever been to church, this is an important conversation that you are not going to want to miss. This is a conversation we've got to have in the American church because it's going to make us all better when we realize how narcissism has weaseled its way into the church and what we can do to make it better. So if you're ready, let's jump into today's conversation together on the Church Disrupted podcast. All right, guys, welcome back to the Church Disrupted podcast with your host, Jeff Cochran. I'm here today with Abby and Buck Fleming. Guys, thanks so much for joining us for the podcast today. We're excited about this one. We've talked a lot about this one for months and months and months, and it just hasn't been the right time to do this episode. But today, we're talking about the narcissistic church. And we're going to talk about what are the things that are making so many modern churches blatantly narcissistic. Why is it that we don't notice it? And what are the dangers of these narcissistic systems, these narcissistic approaches? And before we jump in, of course, this isn't every church. We're not saying that your church is a narcissistic church. We're not saying the churches that use these narcissistic systems are narcissistic churches. What we're saying is these systems lead us to presenting and becoming, if unchecked, narcissistic churches. And we talk a lot today about narcissistic people, okay? That's become all the rage finally for us to talk about it after, decades of never talking about narcissism and what that looks like in day-to-day life. We've talked a whole lot about it because we all have narcissism in us. And just like we all have narcissism in us as humans, every single church also has narcissism in them because churches are led and ran by and are made up of humans. So when we talk about this, we're never just pointing the finger and going, oh, look at those bad people. We're also talking about us, right? And these are things that I think all of us at different times in ministry, would you guys agree? A lot of stuff we're talking about, we've done these things, we've been a part of these things. Like, it's easy to get into that narcissistic flow and not realize it. Would you agree?
Yeah.
So we're not pointing the fingers at anybody. What we are doing is we're trying to shine a light. And there's a very big difference to me, guys, from pointing fingers to shining a light. Shining a light says, hey, that corner's super dirty over there, and we need to deal with that, right? Pointing a finger is going, you're the problem, and if we just get rid of you, and I can't see the speck in my own eye. So before we jump into any of this, because I know this is going to be hot button, okay? I know this is going to piss some people off, okay? And here's just what I would ask you. If it pisses you off, instead of immediately getting mad and trying to write it off, would you ask yourself why it bothers you so much? Especially for the pastors in our audience. Pastors, we love you. We pray for you. We're doing a lot and going to have a lot of stuff coming in the coming year to help pastors and help churches that want to be healthy. But this is going to be really hard. If you pastor a church and you see these systems, it's going to be really hard to not get mad, okay? Buck, we did a single clip, a little tangent. We went on a tiny little tangent, like 45 seconds, in another episode on one of the systems we're talking about today, and it blew up on every platform. And man, some of the stuff we heard from pastors, I would have never, if I didn't see pastor in their bio and I didn't see their church link in their bio, I would have had no clue they were even Christians, let alone pastors. So buckle up, okay? You're going to get mad. You're going to see some of this stuff, whether you're a pastor, just a parishioner. You're going to see some of this stuff probably in your churches. If you see it, it doesn't mean your church is a narcissistic church. It means, hey, We got to pay attention to these things. We got to put our finger on the pulse of these things. And we're also going to talk about what it looks like when it's done right. Because the church I'm going to right now, totally not perfect, okay? I know the people who run it. They are my friends. They're very much so not perfect, right? But this is probably the best I've ever seen a church try to keep these narcissistic systems in check. So we're going to talk about that stuff as well, any things that you guys have seen. But let's start out with this. Let's start out, because we haven't talked a lot about this at all. Are there any questions before we jump into this that y'all have just about like that title and that approach and that topic? We talked about a lot of things around this. We've not talked about deeply what the narcissistic church is. So do y'all have any questions about the narcissistic church, narcissism in church, or narcissistic systems?
I guess the one word that's coming to mind is pride, because historically that's probably been the more common word. Narcissism seems to be a buzzword as of the last few years. So is there a difference between just, somebody's getting prideful, because we know that pastors fall a lot of times because of pride. So what is the difference in the narcissism and the pride? I know they're related. Are they the same? So how does that work?
Well, and I won't go too far into this because we're going to have some psychologists on the podcast soon just talking about narcissism in churches. So if you want more of a detailed breakdown than this, stay tuned. We've got multiple psychologists that are actually going to be coming on. Chelsea Brooke Cole, who wrote the book on narcissism, literally, is going to be coming on to talk with us about this. But I'll give you just, without really having prepped for it, I would say that pride is a part of narcissism. But narcissism isn't always a part of pride, if that makes sense. So pride is a symptom, if you will, of narcissism. And narcissism, guys, we're not talking about narcissistic personality disorder. There's very few people who are actually diagnosed with that. I've met some of them, and they are scary, scary people.
Yes.
Okay? But narcissism's a spectrum. Okay, so you think about a spectrum of like 0 narcissism to 100% narcissism. It's a spectrum, and we all fall on that spectrum, right? So I would say the more narcissistic you are, the greater chance you're going to have a lot of pride and undealt with pride, right? It is a symptom, but it's one of many. Okay, so and if you want more information about narcissism as well from us, if you go back to episode one of this podcast, all the way back to last August, we talked about the acronym Special Me, and the Special Me acronym is used to describe and identify narcissism in people. The same thing works with churches, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that the P in Special Me was pride. So again, if every letter is one of the markers, then pride is one of those markers. But you can be prideful and not be a narcissist. You can be a prideful church and not be a narcissistic church, okay? But pride is something to watch out for. So great question. Any other questions about just kind of the terms?
So correct me if I'm wrong, but to me, narcissism is very self-focused, and that to me, that's when I think of a narcissistic church, I think of a church that's being self-focused, that's focused on itself, focused on its systems. And to me, this is a statement or a question in the form of a statement. To me, I would say a lot of that has to do with even pastors and leadership being hurt, and having their own hurt, having felt betrayed by people they've trusted, feeling betrayed by the people in the congregation, and feeling misunderstood. And so when people don't feel like other people understand them, then a lot of times they feel like they're the only person fighting for themselves. And that's kind of, when I think of it and I think of what I've seen, that's what I think of. Would you agree? I'll ask a question.
Well, so when you think about narcissism, we got to ask ourselves first, where did narcissism come from? And the word literally comes from like the Greek story of Narcissus, right? And Narcissus caught his own reflection in the water of a lake and was so mesmerized by his own reflection that he couldn't move. Killed him. His preoccupation with his own beauty and reflection is what killed him, right? So when I think about a narcissistic person who's really struggling with narcissism, or a church that's really struggling with narcissism, where it's a person or organization that is so focused on themselves that it's their focus on themselves has come to the detriment of their mission. And I don't mean the mission statement on their walls, because it's great. As a church consultant, I help churches come up with mission statements. But your mission statement that you come up with as a church doesn't mean jack squat compared to the mission that we've been given by Jesus.
Right.
So when our preoccupation with our own self, our own systems, our own growth, our own bottom line gets in the way of the great commission, this mission that we're called on together, that becomes an issue. When it gets in the way of us taking care of the people who are in our flock, the sheep who are in our flock, that becomes an issue. So that's the first place I would go back to, is where do we even get the word narcissism from? It's a preoccupation with ourselves that keeps us from seeing everything that's going on around us. And one of the biggest things that keeps us from seeing in churches, and this is sad, the church is number one about people. Jesus was number one about people. And the more narcissistic a church becomes, the less we are about people, because we no longer see people as people that Jesus died for. We see them first. And it doesn't mean that you don't know that, but we see them first as money. We see them first as bottom line. We see them first as people in a chair and a crowd that's going to make us look better. We see all these things they can bring to us. And when we see what people can bring for us and do for us instead of what Jesus can do for them, okay, if that gets twisted and we see that first, then we got a problem. But I would agree, Buck, I've spent my life as a pastor. The last only 4 years or so have I not been a local church day-to-day pastor. I still spend much of my life with pastors. I'm going to meet with some pastors today at 1:00, right? I love pastors, and I think you're on the right track. Most pastors have been deeply hurt by people, because it's a hard position to be in.
Yes.
You're called, as a pastor, you are called to protect the sheep. As a pastor, you're called to, you put yourself on the line for people, and then you turn around and sometimes the sheep bite back, right? Natalie Runyon with Raised to Stay. We're working on trying to get her on the podcast right now, right? She does a great job with balance on this, and it's funny, some of the people who spiritually abused us used to use some of her posts to try to, subtweet us and backdoor correct us, because she sees the balance on both sides. So she posted something the other day, and she said, hey, basically we do have a lot of wolves in sheep's clothing, but we also have a lot of sheep who cry wolf. Okay, there's both.
Good.
And I've experienced sheep biting as a pastor. I've experienced sheep crying wolf. Okay, but what I told her, and she loved this comment, but what I told her from the Church Disrupted account was, I said, that's why we're teaching churches to put a system in place where independent investigations and mediation happens immediately. Because if someone's out there spinning false stories, you'll know and you'll be vindicated immediately. And if they're not, people will be protected. So both happens. And this is what I've seen. Okay. Buck, a lot of times you're most successful by all the metrics we look at. The most successful church pastors that are doing well have been hurt the worst, okay? And because they've been hurt the worst, they insulate themselves to protect themselves, okay? We change governance structures. We change how staffs are laid out. We do everything we can to protect ourselves because it hurts. And that's coming from someone with, I've got PTSD, multiple diagnoses of PTSD, and all that means is I will do whatever it takes, basically, through triggers to protect myself, okay? And I've had to learn that what I'm trying to do to protect myself, that I learned as a 7-year-old kid, does not work as a 38-year-old man. So I've had to learn, I've got to stop protecting myself and put myself out there where I could get hurt. Otherwise, I'm hurting myself worse. There are a lot of pastors who have been through heinous stuff, but because pastors don't feel like there's anywhere they can go, and a lot of pastors don't feel like they should be going to a therapist or anything else, because they never heal, because we never heal, then what we do is we end up insulating ourselves more and more, and we become more narcissistic, not because we set out to be a bad person.
Right.
These pastors become narcissistic, and I say we because that's where I was. We become narcissistic because we're doing everything we can to protect ourselves from that pain again, instead of trusting the healer. This is why, if you're a pastor watching, this is why I recommend that every single pastor on the planet goes to therapy regularly. Even if you say, Jeff, there's nothing wrong, fine, go once a month on a maintenance plan, okay? And if you can't afford therapy, ask your church to pay for it for you, because church members, board members, if we aren't going to be willing to pay for therapy for our church staff when they carry all of your junk and they carry all of our junk, then something's wrong. So if you are at a church and you ask pastor, hey, I want to go to therapy once a month to make sure that I'm healthy. If your church can't afford that, here's what I'm asking you to do. I have zero funds to promise this, so this is no promise. But one of the first things we're trying to do with this nonprofit that we'll be launching very, very soon is we're trying to raise funds so that when a pastor calls us and says, I can't afford therapy, my church can't afford therapy, but I want to make sure that I'm healthy, we want to be able to help you find affordable therapists and subsidize that cost. So if you say, Jeff, I know I need to get healthy, but I can't afford therapy, reach out to us on the website, disrupted.church, reach out to us on social media. While I can't promise we can take care of everyone, we will do everything we can to find you some help because we care about you. Because if we don't deal with those things, if we don't heal from our hurt, then it's the old adage, hurt people. But we don't hurt people until we first insulate ourselves for protection. And that's where a lot of narcissism comes from. Narcissism is not generally, more often than not, it is not a person that's born narcissistic. It's a person who learned narcissistic tendencies as a protection mechanism as a child. Right? That's what it is. So you've learned this. This has worked for you your whole life. It's going to work for you until it all crumbles. And that's what we're seeing with a lot of churches now. It's all crumbling, right? But yeah, I would say a lot of it comes from if we would get healthy as pastors and we would help our pastors get healthy. Healthy pastors are less likely to be narcissistic. But a lot of if you go back to a Chuck DeGroat's book, When Narcissism Comes to Church, one of the best books that I read all of last year. Okay, we've reached out to Chuck trying to get him on the podcast, but I haven't been able to get across to him. So if anybody knows how to get a hold of Chuck DeGroat, let us know. He's an awesome dude. But Chuck writes about that in his book, and he writes about for years as a psychologist, he would work with major denominations in their church planning efforts, and he would do the assessments on these church planners. And they finally asked him to stop doing it because he was recommending that they didn't let so many of these good candidates plant because they were so high on the narcissism scales. And what he said back then was, there's something wrong. There's something in our church systems today that is drawing and magnetizing people higher on the narcissism scales. We're not letting them get healthy. And we love it because they present themselves charismatic. They present themselves as smart and as winsome, and they're great speakers, and they're all of these things. And, but every time he tried to push that, people would say, well, no, we have to have these people plant these churches. So now after decades of these kind of people planting churches, not dealing with their hurt, not dealing with their narcissism first, we've got a lot of big leaders of big churches who are still dealing with this. So yes, and I think we start out from that place, Buck. That was a great question. I think we start out with this place of we're going to hammer some things today, okay? We're not going to pull back, but we're also doing this with empathy. We all around this table get how pastors get there. We understand how churches get there. We're calling for a better way because this isn't right. This isn't best. It's not okay. But we're also not calling you villains. You're only a villain if you keep doing it once you learn, okay? You're not a villain just because you got there, because it's really easy to get here. Does that make sense?
And yeah, one other thing, and one of the reasons I say that is even in my business now, I can see, the hurt causes me to avoid people. The hurt that, with other people causes me to pull back. The hurt, causes me to react differently. And so Abby and I, we attempted to plant a church, been about 10 years ago. And I had a really good friend that absolutely stabbed me in the back, like, just not to get into it. But he was one of the key members in the church we were trying to plant, and absolutely stabbed me in the back. And it was, and then even as the stories I could tell about parents when we were youth leaders. But what you do is that's exactly what you do. You're like, okay, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to stop including other people, and I'm going to develop these systems, so that I can protect myself. And so it really does become self-protection, and you start thinking about yourself and trying to avoid pain more than you think about the gospel, and anyway, so that's...
And it's so easy to get your eyes off of Jesus.
Oh yeah.
And I think as soon as you take your eyes off of Jesus, first of all, a lot of times we don't realize it because it's almost like you have to it's hard to look up. Like you can't stop and just naturally look up. So when you start, it's kind of, we get lazy and we start looking down. We don't even realize it maybe.
And we also don't realize it because we stop looking at Jesus, but we're still looking at all the things we're doing.
Right, for Jesus. Yes. So we think we've got that Jesus thing going on. And I think as soon as you're no longer measuring who you are, what systems you're creating for the church, and all the things that you do as a pastor, as soon as you stop looking at Jesus and making that your number one question, God, what do you want? What do you want to do for these people? Because we get busy. We get in this mentality of the world because that's what's loud, very loud. Everywhere we look is, you need to do this, you need to do this. And we're trying so hard. We're doing all of our effort. And all of a sudden, we're in the danger of the narcissistic zone, of a higher narcissistic zone, because we've been working so hard. When God's going, I have all the answers. You just need to abide in me, stay with me, look at me. I'll fight your battles for you.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's just like Peter. You talked about, taking our eyes off Jesus. When Peter took his eyes off Jesus, he can no longer walk on the water. And look, pastoral ministry is hard. We're called to do something that feels as impossible as walking on the water. And for people who've never been in pastoral ministry, you're going, oh, Jeff, that's hyperbole. But for people who've been in it, no, the things that you're asked to do often feel impossible. And they are without Jesus. They are, okay? But what we do is if we can turn to a man-made system to protect us, we often do that, right? But I want to say a couple of things I think is important. One, I just want everybody to hear this because this is vital that we get this in the church. Systems are okay, all right? I'm a leadership consultant. I'm a business consultant, organizational consultant. I work with churches as well. I do systems and strategy everywhere I go. So there's nobody on the planet who loves systems more than me, okay? I love systems. But systems serve people. People don't serve systems. And when we get it twisted and we start trying to get people to serve systems, right, then there's something wrong. Every system we have in an organization should serve the people that organization serves. Now, also, if we have a system that has started serving the executive team or the leadership or one or two people instead of everybody involved, like the parishioners, then we've also got a problem because systems serve people and good, healthy systems serve the end user. Okay, so if you're talking about an organization, you're talking about a business, healthy systems serve the end user because when the end user is served well, you make more money. It doesn't matter if the CEO is served well. When the end user who's buying your product is served well, you'll make more money. Same thing in a church. When the end user, that parishioner, is served well, there's going to be more tithe dollars, more offering money. There's going to be more people serving because when their lives are being transformed, they are going to want to give back, right? When you're making an impact in their life, they're going to want to partner with you, okay? But systems should always serve people, starting with the end user. People should never serve systems. And I've worked in churches, big and small, where, you know what? We were serving a system. The system wasn't serving us. We were serving the system, and the system was serving someone else's bottom line. So that's when it becomes an issue. But we're talking about, all of this sort of stuff and all these sort of systems right now. We're having to really think about this as we're starting the nonprofit arm to house the research that we're wanting to do, the resources we're wanting to develop to help churches, right? We want to go far beyond just this podcast. And as we're doing that, I've been hurt a lot, okay? So I'm talking to a lot of nonprofit leaders. Again, I'm a consultant, so I'm supposed to have all the answers. But the first thing that I do is I'm talking to people who've been in the trenches as well, because I've consulted with a lot of these. I've not started a lot of nonprofits. Different starting one than building one. Yeah. And what a lot of nonprofit leaders, church leaders, all of them will tell me to do is be really careful with your bylaws. Because if you're not careful with your bylaws, you can be removed from your own organization. You got to protect yourself from the beginning. And we actually had this conversation before we got started because I was giving you guys an update on where the organization's at. And I've taken a different approach because I keep telling them it's not my organization. And if the people in the organization, the leaders that I'm trying to set up and put in place, because I've got to set up this initial board, there's no way around it. I've got to set up a way where they choose their own leaders without me after that. But if the board or the people in the organization feel like I'm not serving it well, or I made a mistake and I can no longer serve it well, they need to be able to get rid of me at any moment and not have to jump through hoops because I built a system to insulate me and protect me, right? Yeah. So from day one, we've actually talked about it. We're playing with ideas that no one's ever played with before. But I'm literally right now, our biggest conversation is, how can you all remove me as a voting member with no voting rights while leading the organization day to day? Because I will lead it as a steward, but I don't need to have power. And there's never anything that should make it hard for you to get rid of me if I need to be getting rid of. Even if, think about this, even if it's just because somebody gets pissed and they say, fine, we'll show you. If you don't want me to lead your organization, why would I want to lead your organization, right? I really feel like one day I'll probably plant a church. People have asked me, Jeff, when are you going to plant a church? I will probably plant a church, but I will not plant a church until I can plant that church without taking a salary. And I can plant that church in a way that says, any week y'all want me going, just say the word, right? Because but I know why people do this. They do these systems because they've been hurt and they need to be protected. Instead of getting that soft heart and saying, you know what, I will continue to come back. I'll continue to be hurt, as hard as that is, if that's what it takes to fulfill the mission that God has given me. So it's very difficult. But we're trying to put our money where our mouth is as we're having these conversations. So
when you know you can be removed at any time, it forces you to lead people.
yeah,
And that's the thing, is that we have, and it was Simon Sinek TED Talk, but he said there's a difference between leaders and people that lead. We have a bunch of people with positions that don't ever lead anybody. And they have titles, but they're not leading. And that's the problem, is that they're leaders with titles that don't lead. Anyway.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, we could get into that. There's a lot of reasons for that too.
Yeah.
I was going to say about the church planting, and how you were talking about the narcissistics, like that it tends to be heavier on the narcissism side, and our experience, and I think our experience echoes probably a lot of people's experience, is the church, as a typical traditional church, charismatic, Baptist, doesn't matter, the church organization itself, the way that it is kind of traditionally been thought about, does not allow for all the congregation to have callings, that to have purpose.
You leave that to the professional Christians.
Yes. And if you feel like let's say it was from the pulpit, you hear, God's got a plan for you. He's got great things for you, because you hear that, and you've heard that your whole life. And then as soon as you step out in that, you get knocked back down like whack-a-mole. Get back in your seat. That's not what I was talking about.
Excuse me, that's not the lane I asked you to stay in.
Right. So I think what happens is then you go, well, crap, what are my options? Well, maybe church planting, because obviously I can't serve in these type of churches, which are the majority, because no one ever likes me, because I have those leadership qualities, or I'm going to speak about this or speak about that. So what do? Well, maybe maybe I'm supposed to plant a church. Maybe that's what God wants for me. And then again, we're responding out of pain. We're responding out of rejection.
We're
and
responding
hurt that we don't even realize we have.
We're trying to make it happen as people instead of waiting on God to make it happen.
Right. And really the biggest issue is that the church is wanting it. It doesn't have the right systems, the right thought processes involved and built to truly build up people like they say from the pulpit they want to.
Exactly. Yeah. So then we don't have those systems. We have people who are leaving churches. We also have young staff members and people in the churches who go to plant churches. But what we've had a lot over the last few decades is we've had a lot of really young church planters. Okay. So they haven't had the chance to figure out how to deal with all this narcissism. Right. And I say that as someone who was a part of a church plant early, and it was by God's grace that I didn't stay in that church plant. I could have done good. I could have been successful. Long story short, I almost lost my family. And that's what God used that as the wake up call to go, you're not ready yet. Yes, you can preach. Yes, you can draw a crowd. I've never not been able to draw a crowd, but I wasn't ready yet. And I'm so grateful now for that pain. Because I went back and served in small churches where nobody knew my name and got okay with nobody knowing my name. So then when I got to a bigger church, I wasn't as healthy as I needed to be. Definitely not. But I was in a healthy enough place to continue healing there and to slowly see some of these things aren't right. But I still remember being at a top 100, largest church in the country, top 100 fastest growing church in the country. And before I realized I was going through spiritual abuse, before I got significantly hurt, before I saw too far behind the curtain, I'd been there a couple of years. I remember we brought in a hiring expert, right? So it's one of these companies where they send in consultants and all they do is help you hire really good people. As they would say, we're going to help you hire studs, which we'll get in that in a different podcast. I hate that phrase. I hate all that. But I remember having to sit down with the guy who was doing this for this national company, and they had me sit down with him multiple times across a weekend because my boss had said, hey, we're looking for these new positions. And he said, what are you looking for? And he said, we're looking for more Jeffs. We want more Jeffs, as many Jeffs as we can get. So the guy sat down and talked to me, and we're talking, and he's just like, what makes you special? What makes you? And I talk about it, and I get excited about it. And after a while, I was like, all we're doing is, I sound like a douchebag right now. I'm just talking about me, and all the things. I'm getting really excited. And it was in that moment that I realized, I was like, y'all don't need more of me. I need less of me.
Yeah.
I'm hearing myself talk. I'm hearing how y'all talking about me. I need less of me because this isn't about me, and the stuff that we're building isn't about me, and it's not about my gifts. And I'm literally getting sick to my stomach talking to the guy because of myself. Okay, it was a wake-up call for me of, whoa, I didn't know what to call it at the time, but there's a lot more narcissism in me that I wanted to be there, but I was healthy enough to recognize it and go get help. So that started kind of a journey for me of going to get help slowly with those things. And the more help I got, the more I started realizing the narcissistic systems. But here's where I'm getting at with that. My boss said, we want more Jeffs. We want as many Jeffs as we can get because I was charismatic. I could draw a crowd. I could win people over. I'm going to be as honest as I know how to be. If I don't keep it in check, I can be one of the master manipulators on this planet. I have to keep it in check. I am overly honest on purpose. Okay, went to a lot of therapy because of that, okay? There's a lot of narcissism in me, which is why it's easy to see it, and I have to fight it every single day, right? So when they said they want more Jeffs, it's because Jeff would be successful. But I can go ahead and tell you, that version of Jeff couldn't have kept it up for decades without having a major moral failure. Because that version of Jeff, I'll go ahead and tell you, they love that version of Jeff. That version of Jeff could walk past someone weeping in the sanctuary and not see them, but see the crooked chair or the light that wasn't positioned correctly. Right? And then here's the thing, the healthier I got, the less Jeffs they wanted. Because what they said, the healthier I got psychologically, the more I dealt with my narcissism, the more I dealt with my PTSD and all those things, right? The less I started protecting myself, the more they actually started saying, hey, you're not as healthy as we thought you were. You're getting unhealthy. Because for them, what they wanted in their version of health, and this isn't just this church, this is most churches built like that. The version of health, the version of what we want is we want someone, you're describing someone who is well-functioning and high on the narcissism scale. And it is under that pressure cooker, it's a disaster waiting to happen. So I say all that, again, from the beginning, why do we do this podcast? I have been spiritually abused, and I have been the spiritual abuser. I have built some of these systems. I have run these systems. I've been on both sides of it. I don't say this as a white knight and as a hero. I say this as someone who said, I can't be complicit in this anymore. We've got to stop it, right? So maybe that's operating out of my pain, but hopefully in a good way, right? But let's talk about actual narcissistic systems. So here's how I'm going to describe a narcissistic church. Let's kind of define loosely a narcissistic church, narcissistic system. There's people who have better definitions, okay? So we've always got the theology and grammar police who are checking our words and, want us to produce, evidence for every single thing we say. This is just my kind of the way I think about it, okay? There are better definitions if you want to go find them. But when I think about a narcissistic system, I think about a system that will do almost anything, including hurting people, running over people, or using people to protect itself. It's a system that's become so infatuated with its own bottom line and mission, with protecting itself, that it'll protect itself at all costs. And when you listen to it, the end result of the majority of the things they talk about, not all, but the end result of the majority of the conversations, no matter how good they sound, is it'll make us better. It'll make the system bigger. It'll make the system better. A narcissistic church is a church that has adopted more narcissistic systems than not, or their biggest systems and biggest drivers are narcissistic systems. that make sense?
Yeah, and I would describe it as a church. I mean, those systems are the beast, and not like the beast from Revelation, but the systems are the beast that constantly has to be fed. And
It's the machine of ministry, and it's always hungry.
it's the machine. And what's the resource it needs? People. People, and so it's they're constantly feeding people into the machine.
And what do we need from the people? We need your time, we need your talents, and we need your money.
But not your
Submission.
leadership.
We need your submission.
Yeah.
It was your submission.
So we need your submission. We need your honor, and submission's good. Honor's good. But again, in a narcissistic system, the system actually chews up anybody who's independent. It chews up. So narcissistic churches and narcissistic systems will chew up apostles. Okay, people with an apostolic gifting. So I'm not talking about one of the 12 apostles. I'm talking about someone who, as the gift of apostleship, they start things. This is more of your entrepreneurial Christians. It'll chew up apostles. A narcissistic system will chew up prophets. It will chew up people with those giftings because they have what they label as independent spirits. Okay? Now, prophets and apostles can do really well if you're at the top. But if you're not at the top and you're not who the system's protecting, you won't last long. So what happens is, when you get hired in those systems, when you actually hire people who have that apostolic or prophetic gifting, which again, the fivefold ministry in Ephesians, we need all of it to have a healthy church. When you get those volunteers or you get those staff, they can hang around and do good for 2 to 3 years, and then they get soured on and they get pushed out. They get forced out. Why? I'm sitting here as someone who got told, hey, you're unhealthy. Well, why am I unhealthy? Well, it was actually what they described was me getting healthy psychologically. But what they also described was, at the same time, you have an independent spirit. I don't have an independent spirit. I have an apostolic calling. I start things, okay? And I would love to start ministries in your church. I would love to start initiatives in your church. I would love to help build your church and not build my church, because I've never really felt called to be a senior pastor. I feel like God's going to ask me to plant a church at some point. That's what we're talking about. And I wanted to plant a church at one point, but I've never really felt called to be a senior pastor, which is different. And I'm not planting a church until I felt like God calls me to do that. But it was that independent spirit. And that's what I've heard from so many people. We hear it on Instagram every week. Yeah, I got fired. I got let go. I got pushed out. I got put in the corner. I got, smacked on the wrist because I had an independent spirit. And guys, an independent spirit is not a spirit that the Bible talks about. Also, pastors, stop labeling people with spirits. Okay? Stop calling everything a spirit. Okay?
It's Satan. It's all Satan. The devil made me do it.
It's not the devil around every corner. Everything's not a spirit, okay? We're dealing with people, and people are messy. And our gifts in the fivefold ministry, as people, volunteers, and staff alike, our gifts in the fivefold ministry should cause sparks with each other. We're different for a reason. And if the prophets are in charge, nobody's going to want to come to your church. No, let me rephrase that. A lot of people are going to want to come to your church when they're agreeing with what you're saying. The moment they disagree, they're going to leave your church. Nobody will stay at your church. If you're an apostle, a lot of people are going to want to come through your church to start it, but you're not going to have the systems to sustain it. If you're a teacher, there's problems that come with that. There's problems that come with shepherds, right? So with all of these, we're going to need those sparks. And instead of trying to protect ourselves, remove people who cause tension, and instead say we're better together as a body under tension. When our muscles get stronger, I'm working out, with my youngest son right now. It's his first year, old enough to be in the gym. We're working out. Well, why does he keep getting stronger? Because he puts his muscles under tension. And it's the breaking down of those muscles under tension that allows them to build back and be stronger a week later, right? We got to do the same thing in the church. We got to welcome all parts of the fivefold ministry of God. But again, the system needs people. It needs their time, it needs their talent, it needs their treasure, it needs their money, but it doesn't need independent thought most of the time because someone's already decided what is right, okay? That's where we run into issues, and that's why we struggle to send some people out to their purpose more than other people, because the more your purpose is outside of the church, the harder a narcissistic church is going to find it to minister to you and to equip you to do the ministry you were called beforehand to do, which is what the role of a pastor is according to Ephesians. It's hardest to do that in a narcissistic church with apostles and with prophets because they're most out of the mold and they're not going to be settled into the parking lot team and satiated or the kids ministry, right? So any other questions about like how we're defining the narcissistic system or a narcissistic church?
Not a question, but just a thought. As you're talking about it too, is I think that a large part of narcissism in the church is the dichotomy between the clergy and the laity, between the staff and the and the laity. When you see the staff separate themselves from the laity, and then because the gifts should be rising up through the laity and through the using those dichotomous terms there, but the gifts should be rising up through the people. And when you've got a dichotomous structure, you've constantly got a boot on your head.
Yep. And
so I think a lot of the pain that people have had is that there's a boot on their head, and we should be lifting other people up. Our goal, our job is to lift other people up. But, but when someone is stepping on you to try to get to the top, and there's even in some churches, there's even structure in the laity where the laity's even, the laity's stepping on each other, where everybody's clawing.
I've got to keep you down to keep my influence.
Yeah, exactly. Like if people heard what you said, they might disagree with what I said.
If people knew how talented you were, or how gifted you were in this area,
you're a threat.
Because I recognize you may be more gifted than me, when it really should just be, hey, well, where's the right spot? Like, nobody's lesser than in the kingdom, right? We just have different spots. But I'll say this. So let's take it a step further, Buck, and then we'll actually jump into what narcissistic systems look like in the church, okay, and what narcissism in the church looks like. We'll pick on a few, but there are a lot of churches who even break down that dichotomy. It is all the rage in the megachurch system right now to break down that dichotomy with two ways. One, we have a leadership development program to develop our volunteers and to help you rise through the ranks, okay? And we have a college. Our college
school.
Now listen, our college isn't really a college. We're going to partner with a college that already exists to let you go there online, but you'll get a lot of credit from interning with us and getting practical experience. But here's the whole reason behind the college, and here's the whole reason for the leadership development program, which, by the way, church leaders, we need to focus. And again, I love leadership. I wrote a book on leadership. We need to stop focusing so much on leadership and start focusing more on gifting and equipping. Okay? Not everybody has the gift of leadership, but everybody has a gift that needs to be equipped in the kingdom. Okay? Why do we want leadership? Because the system demands leaders at different levels. The system demands more middle managers than we can pay. So we need some volunteers that'll become middle managers in the system. That's all it is, okay? And again, you can get mad at me if you want, but as both a pastor in those systems and as a national church consultant, I can tell you all that is we need more middle managers in the systems, okay? And when I was in, when I was in the big church ministry, we called them things like coaches and senior coaches and directors. It was a layer of middle managers, including the majority of the staff were middle managers, okay? We don't need more middle managers. We think we do, and we go back and we justify it with the Moses model. Oh, the Moses model, he had people over 100s and 50s and 10s and all of that. Okay, well, guess what, Pastor? God didn't call you to the Moses model. He called Moses to the Moses model. And if you remember the Moses model, it didn't stay long term. We went to the judges and had a theocracy. And then after the judges, we had a king, right? We had a monarchy, okay? And now we have another king and we have a monarchy. We don't need to go to the Moses model and use it to justify this big system with middle managers. But what they do, man, we start the leadership development program and the college, and some of them call their leadership development program a college, and then you have to go in and find out it's not really a college, it's not accredited, there's no degree program. Why are they calling it a college? I don't know, right? Those two things are all the rage in this system, and the best churches at it have both. The churches that don't have one or two, and the churches that can't figure out how to have either one of those, they at least have an internship. And what is the point? The point is, I've been on these staffs. I've been in the rooms with many of these staffs beyond my own experience on these staffs. The point is, can we find the best and brightest in our flock that we can develop into staff candidates and make staff? But the only way we can develop them into staff candidates, we don't just help them develop their gifting. We have to develop their yes, sir mentality. We have to develop their yes man mentality. And when they're fully invested in our mission, vision, values, and our system, our way of doing things, and they won't question it, well, then we'll hire them. And why will we hire them? Because statistically, if we hired you from inside the church, you're more likely to stay. You're more likely to do the work with less pay. You're less likely to leave because you don't know what it's like on another church staff. And we're not asking, guys, this is my biggest problem. One of my biggest problems before I left the last big church staff that I was on, we were no longer asking if people were called to ministry.
Mm-hmm.
We were no longer asking if people were called to serve in the church. We were asking if we could develop them into a staff member in our systems. And we were putting people to be staff members who were never called to be pastors, and they couldn't carry the weight because it wasn't their calling.
Right.
And then I was watching people fall by the wayside and their families be torn apart and everything else because they were carrying a weight they were never meant to carry. So the dichotomy is a problem. But then you have churches trying to solve that dichotomy between the lady and everybody else by trying to make everybody a staff member in our system, which is also a big part of the problem. The first question we should be asking for every person in our flock is, what are they called to?
Mm-hmm.
What are they gifted to do? And does that happen mostly inside the walls of the church or mostly outside the walls of the church? How can we equip this saint to do the good work that God ordained for them to do before the creation of the world? And instead, we're saying, how can we get them into our leadership development pipeline so we can make them a middle manager and maybe one day a staff member? And we have all these people in Christian culture right now. Some of you, I'm talking to you. You've been working 40, 60 hours almost for free, okay? Because you want to get on a church staff so bad. And if that's how you got to get on that church staff, you don't want to be on that church staff because that church staff is narcissistic and unhealthy, right? Got someone close to me right now, someone that they're not super close to me, someone that I know, that I love, that I care for, that I pray for by name, right? They've been a part of an internship at a large church, a paid internship, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they get paid $10 an hour.
Right.
Okay, now listen to this.
They're missionaries.
I'm not supposed to know all this. So this person, this could fit a lot of different people, but I know this from around the grapevine, not from this specific person. But they're getting paid $10 an hour, okay? But they're also required to serve in ministry spots that they actually work in and serve volunteer hours of 10 plus hours a week. So actually, when you do that free labor that they have to give, otherwise they get fired, when you count that in it, they're making less than minimum wage. And how is the church getting by with paying this person from inside their church who grew up in their church less than minimum wage? Because it's the difference in their internship and their volunteer hours. So this person is working full-time hours basically for peanuts. Why? Because they want to be on staff so bad. Because they want to be a pastor so bad. And if you feel called to be a pastor, pursue that. But if those are the kind of hoops you have to jump through at this church to be a pastor in their system, it's an unhealthy system. And I promise you, you don't want to be a part of that church staff, because when you get it, it will go from being a dream come true to being a nightmare. And I say that because I've been through it.
Well, and I think we need to define what a pastor actually is, because a preacher ain't a pastor.
No, there's a difference in the fivefold ministry.
Yeah.
There's a difference in the shepherd, and there's a difference in a teacher.
Yeah. And, so we got people in the pulpits that call themselves pastors, and they're not pastors. They're just preachers. And, but a pastor is who you are. It's not what you do. Mm-hmm. An apostle is who you are. A prophet, going to Ephesians, but a prophet is who you are.
Even
it's
a
not
teacher.
what you do. A teacher, an evangelist, all that is who you are, not what you do. And that's, to me, that's part of even, I would call that part of the narcissistic tendency of the church, is that we define everything by titles, and we define everything by what we do. We don't define it by who we are.
Yeah.
And it's not something that flows through us. It's burdens that we carry.
And more than that, we don't define our identity from who we are. We define it from what we do, right? But we define our identity. We are supposed to be defining our identity by whose we are.
Yep.
Yes.
Not what we do, not even who we are, whose we are first. I am Jesus's. I am a child of God. And because I am a child of God through the blood of Jesus, I have been given a gift, and I have been called to develop that gift. I've been called to be a part of a church that equips that gift and equips me to use that, because the body needs me to use that gift, because that's who I am. And what I do will then be an overflow of who I am And because I started with whose I am, it will be an overflow of whose I am. And now I am Jesus, and I'm exhibiting the fruit of the Spirit everywhere I go. But if I start with what I do, I have skipped whose I am. I have skipped who I am. And now I'm operating out of what I do, and I'm only as good as the numbers I brought in the day before. And again, peek behind the curtain. This is not one church. This is not just churches I've worked at. But I will tell you, I've seen this as a consultant. I've seen this on staff. Look, whether we got raises or not, whether we kept our job, was based on the number of people we baptized. Which, by the way, baptism comes after salvation, and we're not responsible for salvation. Yet I had a team of staff members who couldn't get a raise if they didn't baptize enough people, okay? That's how we get spiritual abuse in churches. It's a narcissistic system. The system says you got to put more people in the baptism waters, because if people are going through the baptism waters, they'll get more involved. People will get excited. So again, one year, I literally had the goal of over 225 students baptized in a year. Okay? That leads to spiritual abuse of people. Plain and simple. Okay?
When the metrics are what matter.
Yeah, the metrics are what matter. So now, again, we're not sharing the gospel so that people will be transformed and then baptized and walk.
Right.
Yes, we're doing that, but also whether I keep my job is based on how many people I baptize. Okay, again, I get it. But if those are the kind of metrics your church is measuring, we've got to ask this as people in the pews. We got to ask this as staff members. If that's the kind of metrics your church is measuring, your church is bowing down to narcissistic systems, and they are going to hurt people. If they're not doing it already, they're going to. Because again, we shouldn't be measuring. If you want to measure baptisms, that's fine as a measurement. We shouldn't be holding people accountable to baptisms, because you and I don't have the ability to do the thing that leads to a baptism. So let me give you some of the other numbers, right? That I'll just give you the numbers I was held responsible for. And there's a lot of different versions of this. Held responsible to how many volunteers we had in the ministry at any given time. Now, that does make sense in a lot of ways. We do need to have goals of how many volunteers we need to run the ministry. But instead of saying how many volunteers do we need for these people, what if we simply said, hey, we've got these students, and to effectively pastor them, we need some more pastors. Is there anybody that has the gift, the pastoral gift in laity, that you don't need to be paid for it, but you'd love to just pastor some students, right? But instead it was, I got to walk the lobby every single weekend. I got to figure it out. I got to get people who aren't ready and shouldn't be with students in a room with students. You know, they don't know their Bible, but I got to get them in there, because otherwise I'm going to lose my job. Okay, and that was never said. What was said was, no, they need to be able to go through this process. They need to have all this stuff be able to be done. But also, if you don't get this number, you don't get a raise, you get fired, your staff gets fired. Okay, well, then what's going to happen? People constantly got put into every ministry, every system. They got put into systems and positions they weren't ready for. Right. Callings they weren't ready for. I'll give you another one, attendance. If enough people didn't attend the church, you wouldn't get a raise, you get fired. And if you were a supervisor, your team would get fired. There's things that we can do to affect attendance, but God brings people to churches. It's the Holy Spirit that does it. No one comes unless I've first drawn them, right? So it was attendance, okay? When you got, there were usually some other different ones that we had that were very programmatic, but I know most campus pastors, most people who are at that level, they have to carry the amount of tithe dollars coming in. And if not enough tithe money comes in, if I don't hit this arbitrary goal that was set for me by someone else, if I don't do that, then I get fired and my team gets fired and we don't get raises because not enough people tithe. Yet what does Scripture teach? Scripture teaches that we're supposed to give cheerfully as we feel called, not to meet our church's budget so that some of our pastors don't get fired. So that's an example of narcissistic systems. How we determine whether you're doing a good job, whether you get raises, whether you keep your job, and all that is based on these numbers, right? That is a narcissistic system because we will sacrifice sheep on the altar of ministry to keep the bottom line moving. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say this too, because do y'all know the pushback I'm going to get when people hear that? What do you think it's going to be?
People should be outraged.
But the pastoral pushback from senior pastors, you want to know the pushback I'm going to get?
Got to be held accountable.
You got to be held accountable. This guy's just mad. He's just bitter because he couldn't handle ministry at that high of a level. Okay, let's talk about it. All right? Because again, I was complicit in the problem. That's why we're doing this right now. I was complicit in the problem. I could handle it because I never had a performance review where I didn't hit enough of the goals to keep my job and to keep moving forward. Okay. I didn't get a raise the last few years. I just get a little bonus. I didn't get a raise because I was already at the top of what they called my pay band, right? Now, I had to look at my staff at times when they didn't get raises. I had to look at that sort of stuff, but I was never in danger of getting fired based on the performance review and the numbers. I knew how to hit a good number. And I can also tell you how to hit a good number and keep your job is also a great way to hurt people. So we're going to get that pushback because that's what pastors love to do. They got to be, again, not all pastors. This is what unhealthy pastors like to do in this moment. You're messing with my system. So number one, people have to be held accountable. And two, this guy couldn't handle it. And that's why I'm using those examples for me today. So it's not about somebody else that couldn't handle it. Okay. It doesn't matter even if I could handle it or not. The point is pastors shouldn't be handling that. That's not what we're called to.
See, pastors, I want to say pastors, who's putting the pressure on you? Because there should be one person. We're a part of organizations and we have accountability. That's all great. But is God putting the pressure? Is God the one that is saying those things and making sure that you're doing your job or else? That doesn't sound like God to me. And so I would like pastors to ask themselves, because a lot of times they're passing this down. Pressure gets passed down. They feel this way and are pushing it down to make these rules and make people do this and
burning
make people
volunteers
do that.
out.
Yes, and abusing people and chewing people up and making systems that are narcissistic because they have a pressure above them that's pushing on them. So where is that pressure? I mean, and it comes from a lot of different places, but maybe it comes from an organization you don't need to be a part of anymore. Maybe it comes from people in your life that are speaking into you that are not healthy people. They're also narcissistic people. You know, it's coming from all different places. It might even be coming from your flesh and you need to repent.
From yourself, yeah.
So wherever it's coming from, where is that pressure coming from? Because it's miserable.
But if it's not Jesus, it's not a pressure you should be.
Exactly.
You should be
It's going to be life-giving if it's Jesus. Jesus calls us forward, and it's life-giving.
My burden is light.
Yes.
Right?
And it contributes to the kingdom, and it's going to build you up, and it might be hard, but it's safe. You don't feel safe. You don't feel loved when you have all that pressure for performance and perfection. And then if we don't know how to process it, we pass it on down to everybody else. And now you have an unhealthy church and people getting hurt all the way down to the children.
And sometimes in churches, most of the time the systems come from the top and they've been borrowed from another church, because we're going to talk about that here in a minute. Most of the systems that are out there, and this is not today, but we are going to have an episode that is literally about basically the inbreeding in church right now. That there are no original ideas because we're all just sharing the same few systems, right? Whoa. But there are some churches that aren't just taking a system from somewhere else, but what they're doing is sometimes their systems are built in the middle. They're built in that middle management, and they'll say, well, I didn't know that was going on. Okay, but if those kind of narcissistic systems are built in your middle management or built with the people underneath you, it's because they felt that pressure. Right? So as like senior pastors, senior leaders, executive leaders, we got to make sure that we're not pushing that pressure down on people, okay? And again, the less pressure we provide, the more ministry work that gets done, the more that God does, but it feels opposite. Just like the less we push on tithing and the more we push on heartfelt generosity, the more money is going to come into your church, but it doesn't feel like it. It feels like I can control them easy with that tithe button, right? And we'll actually talk about, I want to talk about before we get finished, how the narcissistic system of giving and approaching of giving comes in, because I saw my pastor do something that was so incredibly life-giving this week, and he just continues to surprise me. I've never been more surprised at a church with how they handle finances, and especially at a church plant, because a church plant always needs more money, right? But let's talk about the number one place that I see narcissistic systems and narcissism in the church. This is where I coined this phrase, the narcissistic church, was sitting in church announcements one Sunday. How do you guys see the narcissistic church show up in Sunday announcements, or as some larger churches call it, hosting? Think about the last announcement you heard at your church.
To be honest, I don't think I can't think of anything right offhand, but we spend a lot of Sundays with the children, so we get to avoid that. And I think part of that for me though is that's where I like to hide. Oh man, conferences. church conferences. We're doing a conference, and I mean that type of announcement. That's the last announcement I heard, and it's just all about, you know, show up and God's going to move in this conference, but it's all about, you know, who's teaching at the conference and who's, you know, and it's just pointing people back. And man, oh my gosh. I want to be careful. So you don't see this from me a lot, me being careful. So the church had a conference recently, and it just felt like, and I didn't go to the conference, but the conference continued into Sunday morning, and I sat through that service, and I saw somebody that I hadn't seen in years, and it broke my heart because what she told me was, yeah, I'm going to this other church, but you know, a friend of mine invited me here today, because I don't really feel like I'm being fed at the other church. And so, you know, I'm just getting so much out of this, and, you know, the Lord's really moved, and that's good. That's good stuff.
Very good.
But I know the other church she goes to. I've heard the other pastor preach. He is grounded in the Word of God. And our pastor is too. I mean, I love our pastor. But I'm sitting here, you know, and I know she wants a move of God. Like, she's wanting to experience a move of God. But it broke my heart because when I saw her and had that conversation, I realized, and she's been a Christian, I think 5-6 years now. And, came to Christian a little later in life, and I'm like, she's already falling in or she's at that threshold where she can fall into the consumerism to where am I going to get fed? And so
you think by going to this new church, I'm going to get fed like this every week, but no, you're not, because you're not going to have these high profile conference speakers giving you their candy stick sermon every week.
And so oh man!
Did that just bother? Should I talk about that? Is that going to bother some people?
No, that might, but okay, it's going to bother me because you're going to get me going.
All right, we'll come back to what the candy stick sermon is.
You may be trying to get me going, but anyway, no. So what I realized, I looked at that room fuller than I've ever seen that room that morning, and all of a sudden I realized that the conference was just to get other Christians to come.
Growth strategy.
It was a growth strategy.
Maybe with the spiritual growth as a secondary.
Yeah. And let me say, even if it wasn't, it may not have been intentional, but that was the result.
That was the result. And then the guy that was preaching that Sunday morning, oh my gosh.
I'm assuming it wasn't the pastor of the church.
It was not the pastor of the church. And the guy that was preaching, there's this concept called reverse edification, where one person goes up there and says really nice things about the person that's going to be speaking, and then the person that's speaking goes up there and says really nice things about the pastor, so that way you validated the person that's speaking, and the person that's speaking validates. And so then the whole sermon was about the whole sermon was basically, if you partner properly with the man of God and with this church and this house, you're going to be blessed. And I'm sitting here.
Part of that partnering means financial, serving.
Finances were mentioned a little bit, attendance, serving, but it was everything about that sermon. And I'm sitting there, like, this is awful, and I don't want to get too much into that.
We don't need to get into that. That's a whole nother podcast episode. Yeah. But what I will point out,
you're saving him. Thank you, Abby.
Welcome. What I will point out is that this is an example of, and this does not answer the question you asked. But
I'll answer it next. I'll bring us back.
This is an example of a borrowed system that works somewhere else, and then there's pressure on the pastor to implement these things because this helps you accomplish some of those goals. And these goals again are worthy. They're worthy goals. Yeah. Bring more people in because more people can experience God. That is a worthy goal. But we're borrowing systems instead of using the people and the giftings that are right there in front of you. We're reaching outside because we don't trust anybody, because we have unhealthy systems or no systems set in place at all that will help you, that help anybody cross that threshold of here's everybody sitting in the pews and here's everybody from this that's on the stage or sitting in the front row.
Here's the people who have partnered fully with the man of God and the people who haven't partnered and have only partially partnered.
Right. Or is secretly partnering and just still being a nobody.
Yeah.
Because
maybe that's what they need. Maybe they've been through significant church hurt and religious trauma, because there was a season where I needed to sit. I have recently started serving again. I've been leading a small group the whole time, a Christian small group outside of a specific church, but I needed to just sit in church and worship for a while. I've just started serving again because I needed that time to heal, right?
Yes.
But I'll say, again, we're not against conferences. We're not anti, if your church does a conference, we're not anti-conferences. First of all, I speak at a decent amount of conferences.
I
Okay?
love conferences.
Right? I love going to conferences.
Love conferences.
I speak at conferences. Also, guys, I've done conferences. I've led conferences. There's a picture right there of me doing a conference. Okay, conference will always grow your church. But the question you got to ask is, am I doing this conference to grow my church? Am I doing this conference to hit a number? Or am I doing this conference to equip people? And I'll just tell you this. Most of the time when you're doing a conference to equip people, then the church that puts the conference together doesn't end up doing the conference at their building. It's either a neutral site or another church, because it's not about just growing their building. So again, a conference is not bad. A conference is amoral, but a conference can become narcissistic in your church. But let's talk about church announcements, okay? Now I've done church announcements my entire adult life. I've also done, I've done the hosting. I've had the scripts. I've had the, hey, here's just the announcements, and tell them I've done it all the ways. Let's talk about what the church announcements normally are. Starts out with a welcome, and starts out with a greeting, and we're so glad you're here today. And there may be a call and response. There may be a, hey, can we all clap and give it up for our first time guests? But there's something to pull at your heartstrings, and it happens every week, and you may not ever be known, but the first thing we want you to know is we're really glad you're here, right? There's nothing bad with that by itself, but it can be a little manipulative if we don't have a way to meet you, right? And not come by and get a gift. We'd love for you to come by and get a gift and meet us. Are you actually meeting someone there, or are you just going to a table, getting a gift, and being handed a Connect card? Okay. Now, here's the second thing that we talk about in almost every set of announcements.
Give us your information.
Welcome. We have a Connect card, a Grow card, a this card, a that card. We have a the barcode things, QR code that you can scan, whatever. The next announcement is usually, hey, we really want to know how to serve you. We have a way to do that. So could you fill this information out? We're not going to bother you. We just want to serve you. What we really need to know is we need to count who you are. Were you the right type of person? All that sort of things. Now, there's good and bad to that. The cards aren't bad, because we do need to follow up with people, okay? But that is, I'm telling you, that's where the money's at in church announcements. If you can get people to fill out that card, you'll be doing church announcements. You'll be a star on staff. You'll be doing church announcements from here to Kingdom Come. If you can't get people to fill out that card, screw you. Get off my stage, because you got to get people to fill out that card. Okay, the card's got to be filled out, because the card is so important. And while there are important things to that card, we tell people, think about this language. I used to say this every single weekend. Hey, we just want to know how we can better serve you and how we can better pray for you. I maybe 3 times ever saw one of those prayer requests. I didn't see those cards as a pastor. I'm sure somebody did. I didn't see them, right? I'm up there telling you about it, right? I only got a card. I'll tell you when I got a card, because here's how the cards got distributed every week. I got a card when it was someone who wanted to volunteer in my ministry, because you got to put them to work, because we need their time, we need their talent, we need their treasure. Or I got a card.
Loyalty.
I got a card when it was someone that said, "Oh man, I'm having problems with a student." Okay, well, get them connected to students so we can get them connected, because then they'll give, they'll serve, they'll do all that, right? But it was always through this process of, again, it was nice things. We got to take care of people, but the first lens was not taking care of people. The first lens was, did I follow up? Did I put it in a system? Did I let everybody know? Did we make sure they had that opportunity to serve? Did we invite them to next steps, growth track, whatever we're calling it? What we would do, and I just want you to kind of hear this language, we would say, we just want to know how we can get to know you, how we can serve you better, blah, 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 blah. We have a gift. If you'll go to, guest services, the connection point, the place to meet the pastor, whatever, and bring it by, we'll give you a gift. Why do we give you the gift? Because we're hoping the gift will get you to give us the card. Because again, the card is our gateway into getting you involved. Okay? But we tell you all this. We want to serve you. We want to pray for you. We want to do all that. And while those things can and often are true, they're often not the first truth. The first truth is we want to get you involved. We want to know how the back end language, we want to know how we can move you from partially engaged to fully engaged in our church life. And you're fully engaged if you serve, you give, and you're in a group. And if you're fully engaged, you probably won't leave. It's easier for us to keep our talons in you for a lot of different reasons. So we got to get you fully engaged. Okay, that's the language behind the scenes on a lot of these. So when I hear that, that doesn't necessarily mean, the connect card language doesn't necessarily mean that a church is narcissistic, okay? But so far, all we've heard is, we're so glad you're here. Hey, can you fill out that card and tell us all about you? Because we really want to serve you and take care of you, but we really need to get all your information. Because why do you need my address to serve me and take care of me? Right? Think about some of the questions they ask on these cards. Why do you need to know all the places I feel gifted or want to serve if you just want to pray for me and care for me? Because I'm still just checking out your church, right? So it can be narcissistic, but here's the next thing. Let's talk about the 1 to 3 events that we're going to focus on this week. And at more churches than not, all of these events are things that result in bigger attendance for us, inviting new people, getting money, or making us look good in the community. Hey, it's Serve Day. It's Serve Day. We're going to serve with thousands of other churches. Maybe we tell you that and maybe we don't, but this next Saturday is Serve Day, and we want you to sign up and serve with your small group and get your shirt, and we're going to serve. And yeah, we want to serve our community. Let's not talk about the fact that 12 other ARC churches in your same city are serving with the same churches, and that there's so many schools that they have asked, can we redo your flower beds, that the schools are like, we're running out of things for you to do. Let's not even talk about all that, but we need you to serve. And by the way, when you come back, that's going to be Saturday, and when you come back on Sunday, we're going to have a video, because there's camera crews everywhere, and we're going to have a video produced by Sunday night to talk about all we do, and we're going to use it in the tithing push. It's going to make us look good in the community. It's going to build our brand. It's going to help us get more tithing dollars that weekend. It makes us look good in our network, because if you're a part of ARC loves it when you get their Serve Day shirts and you serve with them and all that. And it looks really good. But is that really what God has called us to do, to serve just one day a year, have everybody doing it? And by the way, I'm just kind of big. If I'm serving with a church right now and camera crews start coming around, I'm done serving that day. If you got one person taking pictures here and there, that's fine. My wife does some of that, okay? But if you actually got camera crews taking everything and you're just having to do it to show it off, and it's got to be on social media, then we're serving for the wrong reason, right? So that could be an event. Another event could be, come to this conference. Another event could be, because we're getting near Easter right now. Hey, guys, Easter's coming up. Go ahead and start thinking about who you're inviting, because we want our friends and family to hear the gospel. Yes, we do want them to hear the gospel, but the push becomes all about, hey, how can we get them in the building? Now, let's think about this. The push becomes, hey, think about who you're inviting. Why don't you get the invite cards off the tables? Why don't you get the door hangers we provided for you and canvass your neighborhood? Why don't you invite everybody to Easter? Because there's people who will never come to church other than Easter and Christmas. And look at the opportunity that we got in front of us. Your friends and your neighbors who don't know Jesus, they could end up in heaven because of your invitation. Okay, again, can you tell I've done this? I can pull at the heartstrings, right? Because of your invitation, they're going to be in heaven. So will you join with us? Will you partner with us? Will you get them here that weekend? But the churches know, and again, most of these churches are counting numbers, pays based on numbers, everything else. If you have a really good Easter, that's 3 to 4 times as large as your normal weekend, then that covers the bad summer months on your numbers. And it covers your bad summer months on reaching that top 100 list or being the biggest church in your local network or this, that, or the other, because it's all an average.
I mean, it sounds to me like a lot of these things, because I agree with and love a lot of the things that you have said. And so, and I think your point is not necessarily that these announcements, this style, or even I am a pet peeve is a camera crew thing for me as well. However, I do also understand that sometimes your church looks like there's nothing going on, and it is good to bring awareness to, hey, there are opportunities. So I see both. I can see both ways. But what I'm really hearing is, because I love all of these things, and they're not always red flags.
No, they're not. They're all good in a vacuum.
They're all can be good, but when you hear these things consistently, and if you put that with, you're getting a check in your spirit and in your heart that you feel something's off, and then you add those things together. So I think it's one of those things that we don't need to try out a new church, because a lot of people that have had church hurt are going to go try out a new church. And then if we hear these things,
doesn't automatically mean it's a bad church.
They could be perfectly fine, but it does mean that, I mean, we're already on guard if we've been hurt before. So I don't need to talk to anybody that's already on guard. But it just doesn't mean that everything is bad. But we do need to make sure our eyes are open and we're paying attention to all the little things, and that we do have a way to personally know the leadership in a way that we can trust their hearts on these things.
And we can
Otherwise,
discuss
we can be manipulated by these things.
Well, and even the trust your heart thing, because I think this is so good, because again, none of these things are evil, right? But even on the leaders will talk about that a lot of times. Well, can you trust our heart? Because if you trust our heart, you don't have to ask those questions. No, you need to give me a reason to trust your heart, right? Yeah. But hopefully this helps us pay attention. Are these things happening consistently over time? And if they're happening consistently over time and it feels a little bit manipulative, it feels a little narcissistic, is there a gateway in my church? Is there a pathway for me to go to talk to someone in power about the conversation? Because I, as a member of the body, have value to add. And if I see this, there should be someone to listen, right? But let's continue to think about these, because they build on themselves. That Easter thing is not bad. But rarely do I hear churches around Easter or Christmas saying, instead of inviting them to our event and getting all the door hangers and stuff like that, hey, we have some resources available for you if you want to invite people, because we're going to share the gospel. But also, we've got a training. We're about a month out from Easter. We've got a training coming up this weekend we want to invite you to, where we're going to teach you how to share the gospel where you work and at your school, because we know there are always going to be people who won't come to church even on Easter, but you're the gospel to them. So we want to train you. And if you want to invite them, if they're ready to come to church, that's great. But we want to train you. When we're training you to share the gospel, that doesn't help our bottom line directly. We're not even sure if you'll do it right. Right? We're not sure about all that. But what we are doing is we're saying this is just about growing the kingdom, and it's about equipping you. It's not about equipping us. When we're talking about bringing them to our Easter, one of our 15 Easter services, it's about us, right? It is. It becomes about us. So then what are the next announcements? The other kinds of announcements that we get consistently are, oh, hey, by the way, there's an opportunity for you to serve. Because in a church that knows what they're doing, they will never tell you they need someone to serve.
We don't need this.
It's an opportunity for you. And we don't want you to miss an opportunity to serve. You can go out and you can find out more about worship this week, or more about kids, or more. There's a serving push. Would you like to get involved in serving here? Here's the other thing that we're talking about. We're talking about our assimilation process. Every single week in churches that have these narcissistic systems, and again, these can be good, but there's a lot of bad that comes with them. This is where you hear about next steps or growth track or discover whatever the name of your church is. Hey, we want to help you. You want to find out more about our church? Why don't you come to this, and we want to help you connect, get more involved, answer the questions that you have. Week 1 is find out more about our church, very carefully crafted. Weeks 2 through 4 is about getting you to serve and give and do the things, right? But we talk about that every week, because outside of the connection card, that's where the money's at. Those are the two things you're going to talk about every week. So we talked about serving. We talked about all that sort of stuff. I thought I turned out all the celebrations, and apparently I haven't. After an update, they've come back. The balloons just went all the way across the screen again. So anyway, party over that. But that threw me off when I saw it. I've got to stop giving the peace sign. But those announcements, what do they all have in common so far? They're all first and foremost about building our bottom line. None of them have built the kingdom in a way that doesn't build our bottom line yet, right? They all share the message that to build the kingdom, and again, this may be inadvertent, but they all share the message to build the kingdom. You need to do it in the walls and in our system.
Well, didn't you read, I think it was in Acts 2 on the day of Pentecost, where the disciples were out passing out flyers to the temple? Have you not read that?
No.
Like, they were out inviting everybody. Hey, the Holy Spirit's going to come. You know, like, there's an appointment with Destiny for the Holy Spirit to come.
What's an appointment with Destiny?
Sorry, I couldn't leave it out. Anyway, there's an appointment with the Holy Spirit, and we're going to pass out flyers because it's been predetermined. And
The Bible I read, they were just praying in the upper room until the Holy Spirit came, and then they did what they like called to do. Because isn't it funny?
and then the Holy Spirit overflowed out of the room. It was an overflow.
Yeah.
And oh my gosh,
There was plenty of church growth. Plenty of church growth. They grew through 3,000 in one day.
they didn't even know what to do with them.
No.
Like,
There were no systems. Don't you find it funny? And again, systems are important. Systems are good. I'm a systems guy. But if God wanted us to care about systems as much as we care about systems, he would have given us some in the New Testament. We get very strikingly few church systems. And the ones we get, we totally ignore today. The ones he actually gave us, we ignore, like deacons taking care of. A lot of churches are just ignoring deacons now because that was feeding people and taking care of all that. But so you, and then if your announcements, sometimes your announcements will reach into giving. And then giving is always about, more often than not, it's about your opportunity. Hey, this is just another way that we worship. Until I got on church staff, I hadn't heard a ton about how we worship through giving. I knew we were supposed to give, but worshiping through giving is the way we worship. We're going to give you the opportunity to worship. We do all that, but we also talk about the 10%. We talk about everything. And rarely do the churches that I visit, because I visit churches all the time because of what I do, it has become a rarity to hear churches that say, as God leads you to give, give. They say things like, if you haven't brought your tithes in the storehouse, hey, let's talk about all the easy ways we have for you to give. And again, there's nothing wrong with having easy ways for you to give. And here's what happens a lot of times, whether this is in the announcements or afterward. When we're talking about giving, this is the part of this is the part of the service where we worship through giving. Let me tell you a story or show you a video that will pull at your heartstrings and proves to you that we use your money well.
look at these kids in Guatemala.
Look at the kids in Guatemala. Look at this homeless family that we helped restore in our downtown of our city. And look at this and look at that. And look at this car that we were able to give to this family in need. Look at this medical debt that we were able to forgive. And it's all these things, right? What they never talk about, though, are the places where they spend most of their money. They talk about where they're spending 2 to 5% of the money because those are the good stories. They don't talk about all the other stuff, right? And you almost never hear a church say, hey guys, honestly, we're having a hard time meeting the budget for the ministry that we committed to. So if God is calling you to give more and partner with us to help fill in that gap, we would love that. And we don't say those things. That's how those announcements go. So I sit through most announcements and all I hear is, hey, help us. Help us grow. We need you to give, serve, do all the things to help us grow, to help us serve the gospel. And it becomes a message of the way we build the kingdom is all through these systems. And we're not talking about sending anybody out. A lot of times those announcements aren't about things that, that don't help the church, but just help people. So I'm going to give you the opposite side. Okay. And I'm going to, I pick on churches. I picked on my church before. I'm going to brag on my church right now. Okay. And I hate that phrase because it's not our church. Okay. So I'm trying to correct that with myself. The church I go to, I want to brag on that body. Okay. The announcements this weekend. Hey, we're really glad that you're here. There was no clapping. There was no, hey, we're really glad you're here. If you have any questions, you can ask us about it. There was a connect card thing. We do it through text. It was, hey, you can send information to this number. It's one of the most important things you could do for us. Very honest. One of the most important things that you could do for us because we want to know how we can follow up with you. We want to know how we can send you more information about our church. We're really not going to try to bother you, but we do want to follow up. And I love it because once you join that text system, but again, this isn't just about getting you to serve. Once you join that text system, they start sending you every weekend while you're on it, on Friday or Saturday. Here's the scripture passage we're talking about this weekend if you want to prepare and read ahead and pray about it. Yeah. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it because that does
That is
nothing.
awesome.
Does nothing for them. It lets me look at it because if I look at it, I may disagree because I'm bringing my theologian hat in, and then I could be a problem, but you're sending it to me anyway. But then they do this.
That's a system that points people to the Word of God.
Yes, and it helps them in a way that doesn't necessarily help you grow in the seats, right? It's actually putting...
It's genuine.
Yes. Yeah. So, but here were the other announcements. I may miss one, but I'm going to try to think of it. The other announcement was, hey, because every fifth Sunday, not just on Serve Day, every fifth Sunday, we don't meet to worship, we meet to serve. With strikingly few cameras. We'll put something on social media so people know how it went, right? but we're doing a diaper drive and we're helping a local nonprofit prepare all these diapers and stuff to go to moms in need. That's what we're doing Sunday. And it was a, hey, we're not meeting for worship, but we are meeting here. And if you want to come help us, here's how you can help. You can bring some diapers or you can just come help pack diapers. But we're going to do this and we're going to serve. And we're really excited about being able to serve outside of our community. And I guarantee you every fifth Sunday, they probably take a hit on tithing and they do it anyway. Right? Now, here's the next one. I'm going to give you a couple of these and I want us to talk about them when you hear them in succession. The next one was there's a ladies' night coming up. And the weeks before it was a guys' night. And it's not at the church, and we're not asking you to invite people. This is so that we can all get to know each other better. Because when we know you and we're in community, we can serve one another better. We want you to be a part of this community. So for the guys' night, which happened not too long ago, it was, hey, we met at a pizza place to hang out, eat pizza, love each other. And because guys don't register, they didn't even ask you to register. Just show up and we'll make it happen, right? For the ladies' night that they announced this week, it was, hey, we're going to go have a nicer dinner together. We just asked that you would register so we have your place reserved. None of them cost you anything. None of them happened at the church. None of them were asked to invite. It was just, hey, we just want to get to know you. And we do this regularly because we all want to get to know each other. Zero pressure, right? Those were the things that they talked about. I think they may have talked about something else. Oh, yeah, they talked about, hey, Easter's coming up. We'd love for you to invite someone. We think it's going to be a great weekend. Right? And we think we know people will hear the gospel. We're excited about it. But also we're doing an Easter egg hunt and a barbecue the week before. If you want to invite people to that, feel free to invite them to it, register. We're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to get to know each other. We're going to do all that. But it's not even trying to get them there on Easter, right? That's totally separate. And then when it came time for giving, and I love this, when it came time for giving, it was, hey, I just wanted to update you. He does this about once a month. I just wanted to update you and let you know where we're at in regards to our budget and our plan for this year, especially since we're a church plant that just went autonomous. Hey, we're doing really well. This is the time of year, January and February, where giving normally goes down. So as I'm sharing this, you probably think, oh, giving went down. That's normal because it's coming after the holidays. It will need to come back. And here's the number it needs to come back to, March through May. But we anticipate that that's happening. We just wanted to let you know. And if God's calling you to give more, to give less, to adjust your giving, or to partner with us for the first time, if he's calling you to do that, we would love to have you partner with us. But we just wanted to keep you aware of what's going on in the life of the church. And praise God for the fact that you guys give. It actually lets us do what we do. And we're so grateful for that. Guys, that's a totally different announcement set.
It's a different feel. It definitely feels like the church leadership is secure. You know, they're not just saying we're secure. We don't need this. We don't need that. They're not having to say that. They're just living it. They're secure. And it also brings the message that we care about the people that are in front of us. Yes, we love the people that are outside of us. But when everything is so focused on the outside, and again, we talk about the inside of the walls, but we're trying to get the outside people to come in the walls. Yeah. So when I say the outside, I don't mean like you shouldn't focus on the people out of the walls. Yeah. But if all we're doing is talking about like you don't matter that you're sitting here and we're not using you and we don't even know what your gifting is or really what your name is and we don't care. But we do care if you bring somebody because we want you to be a disciple who's making disciples, which means you're bringing people to church. That's a problem. But that's not what those announcements were about. Those announcements were, just very, you felt like a family just sharing.
I felt like they were for me and the family around me.
Yeah.
Right? Most church announcements, I feel like they're to get me to do something.
Yeah.
I felt like these church announcements were inviting me to be a part of something. And some of them were just for me. And literally when I talked about, so I wanted to go back to this as well. We didn't do this now. We did this a few months ago. Okay. But a few months ago, we actually had the announcement and it was, hey, on this fifth Sunday, instead of doing a serving Sunday, we're going to change this one. And we're bringing in someone who is very good at training lay people on evangelism. And we're going to have an evangelism training class so that you can feel more comfortable and confident sharing the gospel where you go and just sharing the story of Jesus where you go with people, because we know you're going to get to share the gospel where you live, work, and play in places where we can't. Again, they paid for it. They did it. It took probably a day away of tithing, but it helped people, right? So there's just a difference. I'm not saying every church should have those announcements, but I'm saying there is a difference. The narcissism in our churches will generally show up in announcements if you listen, okay? And there will be a lot of language making it about you, but ask, is that manipulative language? Is it really about me? Who's it about first? That's always an important thing. Is it about the system first? Is it about a person? Is it about the people we're serving? Is it about us? Who is it, right? Because I'm not saying every announcement should be about you. I'm not saying every ministry should be about you. Again, it should be outside the church, inside the church, you, others, all of those things together. But let's go to deeper systems, because again, you can tell it in the way the systems come across in the announcements. And the announcements were important because it shows part of the serving system. It shows part of the connect card systems. It shows all of that. It shows that people are worried about whether they're hitting certain numbers or not for their goals and for their money. Okay? Because there's a reason why we're doing this. There's also a reason why on more and more churches, someone's reading from a teleprompter, because we don't trust that staff member to actually get this done without reading a script that we wrote for them. But let's talk about, I really want to talk about one specific system because we don't have a ton of time today. We can potentially mention some others, but I want to talk about one specific system because it's just a good example. But there's a lot of these narcissistic systems in churches. I want to talk about, and not just pick on one, but growth track, next steps, discovery classes. There's a few different variations out there. They all come from just a few different churches, but they are assimilation systems. They are designed, let's talk about it from the inside, they're designed by the experts to get people assimilated into your church, and to go back to that phrase earlier, to get people fully engaged in your church. Why are they designed that way? They're designed, and again, I'm speaking as a consultant, I'm speaking as someone who's been in these rooms. They are designed behind closed doors to assimilate people into your church, because that is the number one thing that will help church growth. When you get people who are assimilated, they're serving, they're giving, right? And they're in a small group. They're going to do more for your church growth. It is about that church growth. It is a church growth system. There's nothing wrong per se with the church growth system, but we don't tell people that's what it is. We don't tell them it's a assimilation system. We tell them things like, and this is where it becomes so manipulative for me. If we said, hey, this is our assimilation program, and if you want to volunteer with us, this is how we walk you through to get you in the right spot, that'd be totally different. But when we say, hey, we would love to have you go through growth track or next steps or whatever, because we want to help you discover your purpose. Or a lot of them will say, we want to help you know God, find freedom, and discover purpose. And if your church talks about knowing God, finding freedom, and discovering purpose, there's nothing wrong with that. Those are good things. But I need you to know that came from Church of the Highlands, and it didn't come from your church. There's a bunch of churches across the country right now are just sharing that. We all exist to help you know God, find freedom, discover your purpose. We'll normally put one that's just us in there, right? But the bottom line, you look at things like Growth Track and you look at what they do. That's what we're going to talk about. We're going to break it down. I've actually got the Growth Track book in front of me if we need it. It is designed to assimilate people. It is not designed, not one bit, to help you find your purpose. All of that language, I'm just going to be honest, all of that language.
I'm glad you said it.
Well, dude, I've been taught by some of the best on how to do it, okay? All of that language is designed to get people to go, oh, they really care about me. Get you into a system, the system that plugs you into all the other systems where we can control you and squeeze as much out of you as possible. And again, people need to serve. There's nothing wrong with wanting to grow your church. There's nothing wrong with getting people to serve and be in a small group. All those things are good. But this system, I'm not even saying it was intentionally designed this way. This system will squeeze every ounce of juice it can out of you. And when you are a lifeless, fruitless husk, they will discard you like the trash. The reason why I care about these systems, these kind of narcissistic systems, the most narcissistic systems leave people broken by the side of the road. They foster spiritual abuse. And I believe, I know we're going to take hate from this because we have taken so much hate every time we talked about this, but these systems can be good, but they're going to have to be changed, and the way we talk about them have to be changed. Otherwise, I have seen them do as much damage as they've done good. I'm not going to say more damage, but I've seen them do as much damage as they've done good. So we're going to talk about these interchangeably. Growth track, next steps, discovery classes, they're all a little different, but a lot of them are the same. Okay? And just because your church, let me be clear, if your church uses growth track, that does not mean you need to leave that church. Okay? There are some churches that
unless your name is Buck.
Now listen. Okay, I got you. I'm the same way. It's a big red flag for me.
Yeah.
But a red flag doesn't mean leave. A red flag means ask questions, okay? There are some churches I know that have used the good of growth track, and they've changed the way they talk about it, and they've changed the way the weeks go, and they've added things in because they really do want to use it in a good way, okay? But the way it's taught, the way it was created, it has to be changed. So if your church uses any of these systems, we're not telling you to leave your church, but it may be worth asking questions or opening your eyes. Again, the answer to a narcissistic church is not to go, hey, I'm leaving. The answer is to have discussions about it. Now, how those discussions are handled, how those discussions are handled or not handled may mean you need to leave. Okay. But again, we want to have these discussions because our goal, guys, our goal is not to get you to leave your church. Right. Our goal is not to get churches to, totally change the way we want to do this. Our goal is to start conversations in churches to help churches get healthier, because we care about churches. We care about pastors. We care about parishioners, but we also care about people not being spiritually abused, not being used, not being manipulated. So let's talk about growth track. How do you guys hear growth track, next steps, all those sort of things, these assimilation systems? How do you hear them talked about from the pulpit most often? What's the promise?
Sometimes the promise is, and I actually like this part of it, but I don't want to really talk about the good parts, but because that's just rare and easily abused. But some of the good parts are like one of the things is, this is how you join our church.
Yep, I think that's a good part as well.
I actually think that requiring certain things for membership makes membership a thing. Otherwise, it's like, what's the point? So I do like that that this sets up requirements
for sure
for membership, because you should expect something out of your members because they're members, But the way that it's talked from the pulpit could be, this is how you join our church, and you're required to come to these classes.
If you want to join the church.
If you want to join the church, that's good and bad, depending on what's taught.
I think that's good, though, because if you're saying that, though, people know what they're getting into.
Yes, exactly. So it's helpful to know, or this is how you learn about our church. That's really all I've heard. Or if you want to serve, just if you want to do anything or be anybody in this church, you've got to do this. That's in a nutshell, that's the way I hear it described from the pulpit.
And if we're being honest, that can be helpful. We got to be really honest, though, because if we're not completely honest, what that basically means is you can't get involved in our church in any way until you go through the system. Because the way I'm going to say this is going to sound bad. That's the only way I know how to say it. If you don't bow down and submit to this system,
then
you don't fit in the other systems. So if you can't bow down and submit to this system, then you can't serve somewhere else, because this system gets the people who are too independent right off the bat, who aren't submissive enough off the bat to not get in there. So again, if we're talking about it as a serving system, and all that, I think it could be good. I hear about it, and Buck, I think you've heard this a lot. I hear about it most from, we want to help you discover your purpose. We want to help you find freedom. We want to help you. Hey, you're going to learn about our church. You're going to learn about how you can get involved. But this is about you discovering your purpose, because we care about you living out your purpose for Christ. And it sounds so
within
good.
Our system.
Yeah, it sounds so good. But what you're going to see is, again, it's very narcissistic. It's very insular. There is nothing wrong. I'm going to say this again. There's nothing wrong with serving in your church. And as a Christ follower, you should serve in your church. But your purpose is not to serve in your church.
Amen.
That is a small part of what we're called to do. So,
and you can live out your purpose by serving in the church.
Yeah.
Even though your purpose isn't to serve, you can actually live out the purpose through serving, because the serving can be a tool to live out your purpose. But
that can't be it.
That's not it. It's not that it can't be. It's just not. Yeah. It's, oh my gosh.
So we're not throwing out the baby with the bathwater. We're not saying you shouldn't serve, which is when we talk about this, we always get that pushback of people saying, oh, so you're just saying we shouldn't serve. No, we're not saying that. But we're saying the purpose of a Christ follower, okay, it's that thing that God created you to do before the foundation of the world. And the purpose of the church and pastors is to equip you to live out that purpose. And that purpose will always fulfill the greatest purpose, which is the Great Commission. And the Great Commission happens outside the walls of the church, because most people aren't coming inside the walls of the church until they first become a part of the church, right? We have changed that. We have actually outsourced the Great Commission to professional Christians.
Yes.
I'll just invite my friends to church. They'll hear the gospel, and then it's all on you, Pastor. We've outsourced the Great Commission. The Great Commission is making disciples where we live, work, and play, which includes sharing the gospel. Okay, we're going to do a whole episode on the Great Commission at some point because people don't understand that. But the Great Commission was never outsourcing the gospel to professional Christians.
Well, so we are making disciples of churchianity, not of Jesus.
Yeah.
We're making disciples of systems, not of Jesus. We're making disciples of growth track and discovering your purpose, and we're making disciples of pastors, not of Jesus. And we think that the only way, because of the church systems and church structures, so many people think that the only way they can ever really have purpose in Christ is if they have a stupid microphone. And I said the word stupid again. But if they have a microphone. And so people sit here in the pews feeling unfulfilled because they haven't gotten a microphone or they don't get to preach. When the truth is, there are some people that are called to preach, but what we're all called to is to make disciples.
That's right.
And we can make disciples where we will live, work, and play. We can make disciples by serving in the parking lot. We can make disciples by showing up to worship service on Sunday morning.
Yeah.
And we can make disciples by serving.
But you have to be taught differently. If you're going to make disciples, so let me just throw this out there. If you're going to make disciples in the parking lot, you have to be taught how to intentionally disciple that person who's serving with you over years.
Yes.
Because you will not just make disciples by serving. So I'll just tell you this. So you think about Christian entrepreneurs. Think about Christian entrepreneurs, because I work with a ton of Christian entrepreneurs in what I do with my business, okay? Christian entrepreneurs normally have a more apostolic gifting, okay? If I went through Growth Track as a Christian entrepreneur, if I went through Growth Track right now and I did their spiritual gifts assessment, I did their DISC assessment, their Enneagram assessment, whatever they're doing.
They tell you to leave.
No, what they're going to do, they're going to tell me that I could lead a small group.
Yes.
They're going to tell me I could serve in students.
Yep.
They're going to tell me I could do any of those sort of things. And none of them would even come close to fulfilling my purpose, right? Because what they're never going to do, they're never going to say, unless it's been changed. Again, Growth Track doesn't, it's not a way to say, hey, you have an apostolic kind of gifting and you might need to start a kingdom business. Or maybe you need to start a ministry. We need to get some of the apostolically gifted people to get together and say, hey, what are we not doing that we should be doing as a church? Is there a ministry on your heart? Those are different ways that we could fulfill our purpose. But churches aren't sending out entrepreneurs. They're not sending out kingdom entrepreneurs right now. We're not doing all that. You know what it would also tell me I could do? It'd tell me I'd be great in the parking lot. But I'm going to be honest. And look, I serve at my church. I help lead worship. I help do teardowns sometimes and stuff like that, right? But if you're putting me in the parking lot or to do teardown or put me in with students, I was a student pastor for a long time, so I can do great with them too. None of that is actually fulfilling my purpose, because I need to be out here not only starting kingdom organizations, I need to be helping propel the people who are starting kingdom organizations. And if I'm not starting things that are new and helping people start things that are new to reach people outside the church, then I'm not fulfilling my purpose.
But
now,
that
everybody's is different.
But that requires a conversation.
It does.
And that's not from what I've seen, from my experience. I don't think that's part of the system.
Let's talk about the system. I've got it in front of me.
The system is, the part of the system is, let's pass out all of the, let's have a class, you have however many people, and let's pass out all the...
It's 3 to 4 weeks.
Let's pass out all the check in the box, all the assessments, and then we'll give you results.
Yep.
That's not a discussion.
It's not a
It's
discussion.
not personal.
So
you can make it that way, but I don't think the system's set up that way. And if people pick this is me speaking. I think a lot of people pick this because they're at their wits' end and they need a system to come in and fill the places.
They don't have enough volunteers.
Lack. Yes.
And instead of knowing how to talk to our church about we don't have enough volunteers, we do this. Versus, again, I'll give an example of my pastor. He came out not too long ago and said, hey, if any of you feel called to do children's ministry, we're looking for some more people to do children's ministry. And here's the reason why. Our children's pastor hasn't got to worship in 2 months because she's always back there with other people's kids. And that's not okay. We've got people doing too much and they're not able to worship. So if you could give 1 weekend a month to serve with kids, especially if you have kids, that would help everybody to be able to still worship and love on our kids. Yes.
Okay. Because I think that's what people need to hear. People need to hear not just that people have tried these things, but that they have worked.
But here's the other thing too, though. Here's the other thing. It takes faith.
Yes.
Because sometimes we'll say, we don't have enough volunteers to do this ministry. And if you don't get enough volunteers, then you have to be able to come to the conclusion that's God telling us not yet. If we're trying to get ahead of God, we don't have enough volunteers to do what he told us to do, then we're ahead of God. Let's back it off. Let's do it differently, right? And I guarantee you, pastors, if you say, hey, we don't have enough volunteers in kids ministry, so what we're going to end up doing is once a month, we're going to start bringing all the kids in here and having a family service so that our people can serve unless we get X number of volunteers. Do that for 2 months, you'll have enough volunteers, right? But what we're doing is we're making it easy on people. Okay, well, if you don't want to be a part here and you don't want to do a part of the work as a part of the body, well, then you can just go to another church where they'll do the work for you. And that's why, here's the problem. Churches that are running these systems, the bigger they get, the less people give and the less people serve, right? But the people who are giving and serving give more and serve more. So under these systems, the average person in most of the churches I've looked at, when we get a look at their numbers, these systems, the average person's going to serve 3 to 4 times, 3 to 4 places a month. They're serving in multiple ministries. They're giving big dollars, right? But the average parishioner is getting less and less involved because what we think these systems are working because the bottom line gets better. But what we don't realize is it's cannibalizing itself. So let's talk about the actual system. And again, Growth Track comes from Church of the Highlands. That's where it was created, okay? Growth Track is used a lot of places. Sometimes it's changed, sometimes it's not. I'm going through the Church of the Highlands book, the way this system was created. Okay, the first thing that you're going to notice, they have a lot of scripture here. I think this is very important to say. They change the translation of scripture with almost every verse. That's always a red flag. When you're at a part of a church, you have a pastor who preaches and constantly changes translations, it's because they're finding the translation that best proof texts what they're trying to say, okay? Most churches and pastors, when you're healthy, I've always taught people this in preaching, use one translation, and then when you don't, let people know why you're not. I don't think they do a good job of translating this word. I love the way the NIV says it instead of the NLT, something like that. But I think I counted 5, 6 different translations used loosely throughout this because it's just about proving points. But here are the steps. Step 1 is become a member, okay, where they talk to you about the history of Church of the Highlands, the membership covenant, all of that, okay? Step 2 of Growth Track is to discover your design. So we're talking about like gifting. That sounds really good, spiritual gifts, all that. You take a personality assessment, which is either usually DISC, Enneagram, or Myers-Briggs, depending on the church. You can change it. And you take a spiritual gifts assessment, okay? But that's what you do. And then step 3 is join the team. Step 3, they have people representing every team, and I used to have to go in and do this, and we called it Next Steps. But you have people from every team who will meet you and talk to you, and you pick a team to serve in before you leave that day, right? But then here's what they're going to do. They're also going to send all those cards and all the stuff you filled out to all of the other teams that you might be a good fit for. So you can start recruiting people for multiple things the next week, okay? That's Growth Track. Step 1, 2, and 3. 1, join our church and sign the membership covenant. 2, discover your gifting and personality, but we'll call it your design, okay? And then 3, join the team. But let's go through what's a little bit on each one of these. On becoming a member, here's what you do. You're going to find out about the history and how they started small and all that, but you're going to find out that your spiritual journey, this is what it says, our spiritual journey consists of 4 steps. As Christians, our spiritual journey consists of 4 steps. Know God. And then they give scripture out of 3 separate translations. Find freedom and discover purpose, right? We help people discover their purpose through things like Growth Track, through getting on the dream team, right? But then they tell you the 4th one, make a difference. Make a difference. Now, making a difference is not just making a difference in your world, but it's serving in your church. But that's what they're distilling. I mean, it literally says this in the book. Our spiritual journey consists of 4 steps. If you know God, find freedom, discover purpose, and make a difference, that's your spiritual journey.
Justice warriors. Yay. I mean, but man,
there's so much that is left out of our spiritual journey.
we wonder why we've got this Christian social justice movement, and it's make a difference. There's nothing wrong with social justice.
Church history has a whole lot of
it. And there's a lot of social justice.
But our purpose.
This has been social justice thing. I've been reading a book. This thing has been an argument for many years.
Our purpose isn't social justice.
No,
social
the
justice
problem
happens because we're Christians
or
and because
for the
of purpose.
people that are called to it, which I guess I need to go to the class to find out if that's me.
And I'm pro. So listen, I'm pro social justice. But here's the thing: the problem we're seeing with a lot of these systems is they compartmentalize Christianity, and they say all of Christianity is distilled into one or two pieces of Christianity. That's the problem, right?
Check
but
this
here's what it
box.
says. It also tells you we want to talk about our government in the first week. Here's our government. We're guided by the staff, which basically means the staff makes the decisions. That is important to know. That's a red flag to me if the staff makes all the decisions. But they're protected by trustees, and it basically goes on to tell you the trustees make the financial decisions. Okay, the staff serve as the staff elders, and the trustees serve as the non-staff elders. But they're just making the financial decisions, and they're strengthened by overseers. The overseers are made up of 5 pastors of respected congregations and ministries who love Church of the Highlands and its senior pastor and provide spiritual protection for the church. They may be called upon to help in accountability matters relating to the senior pastor, which means they're the only ones that can get rid of the senior pastor and deal with accountability issues. But did you notice they're 5 pastors of other congregations, not in Alabama, not a part of Church of the Highlands, and they started because they love Church of the Highlands and they love their senior pastor, which means they are not going to be really good at holding them accountable. Also, that's like having absentee landlords. We call you in to fix a problem, but you don't live here, so you don't know what the problem is.
And the only problem that it sounds like they are fixing is the head pastor, not the looking at the government.
Well, because
and
outside
and
of potentially removing the head pastor or having to correct them, there's nothing else that they can do because those decisions are made by staff. Also, it says they could may be called on to help in accountability matters relating to the senior pastor if requested to do so by the pastoral staff team. Okay, well, the only ones they're going to listen to are the high-level executive leaders anyway, which basically just goes to show you it is near impossible to actually get accountability, from my opinion, from my vantage point in that church structure. Now, there are going to be people, if you go to Church of the Highlands, I'm not trying to say leave Church of the Highlands, but there are going to be people who try to take up for that. And I'm just going to say, if you look back, there is a shocking amount of the scandals that have come out in recent years that are tied to churches that use growth track and have this government model. Okay, so bottom line, I'm not saying they're all bad, but most of the scandals were attached to growth track and this government model because there's something wrong there.
Jeff, I think God wants to fix and change and alter the way that is done, because that is probably most common. The most common way that churches are set up, potentially, from my limited viewpoint.
Especially like growing churches, modern churches.
God has something new that he's pushing out to his people and to his churches.
Yeah.
And it's the churches that have their ear and their ears and their eyes tuned to God and what God's trying to do in this time that's different and changing.
Exactly.
That are going to survive, that are going to adjust, that are going to keep going healthy with the Lord, sheep and goats. If we're going to continue to go that way, he's bringing out all of this as well. You know, that
this
he's
is a season of
allowing
exposing.
this to expose that there are dangers here that have to be addressed before we go into the next season.
Yeah. Well, and I'm gonna talk about this. This is gonna make people mad. ARC stands for the Association of Related Churches. ARC is tied to Church of the Highlands. People who work at Church of the Highlands are the people who lead ARC. ARC was started basically out of Church of the Highlands. Okay, you can look into those connections, but they are very similar, very tied together. ARC is one of the largest, if not the largest, church planting network in the United States, in North America. And the majority of ARC churches that are planted, they are taught to plant with this governance structure. They have outside overseers, which is why, giving as one example, Venue Church in Chattanooga, we talked about it on other episodes, so I'm not going to get detailed into it. A couple of years ago, Venue Church in Chattanooga, Tabner Smith, one of the fastest growing churches in all the country. You have Dino Rizzo, who leads ARC, is on video talking about while preaching at Venue that they had every church planter through ARC meet with Tabner because they wanted them to learn from Tabner because Tabner was so good at what he did, right? Well, Tabner ends up having an affair. It comes out publicly. And that board of overseers, those 5 overseers from respected congregations who love Tabner, they all quit rather than have their names go out publicly and have to deal with this. They quit because they're of respected organizations. So then there was no set of elders, okay? No one removed him. Dude sat out for a couple of weeks. He sat out of the pulpit for a couple of weeks, and now he is still leading that church after moral failure that led to the end of his marriage, right? His entire staff quit. His entire staff quit when it came out in one day. He is still the pastor of that church because under that model, no one could hold him accountable.
What about that guy in Murfreesboro that's so popular?
Talking about Greg Locke?
Greg Locke.
Yeah, I don't even know what his governance structure is.
But I don't know about what his governance structure is, but he gets divorced and then...
Well, he's married to he's married to the lady that was the secretary when he was married.
I call it his secretary. So...
And things like that is why we label it explicit even when it's not.
But, I mean, come on. Come on, man.
Yeah.
To quote somebody else. But
and I don't know about their governance structure, but again, a lot of these churches are using variations of this. Like if you listen to stuff like I love a lot of what Craig Groeschel has done with Life Church and stuff like that, right? There's a lot of pastors that I respect in a lot of ways. I respect Tim Ross. I want to have Tim Ross on the podcast one day. I love a lot of the things that Tim Ross has done. But I've heard Tim Ross. I've heard Craig Groeschel. I've heard name after name after name. I just dropped a couple of names I was thinking about. I've heard some of the most famous pastors in the world talk about Chris Hodges and talk about how he's the systems guy and everybody learns their systems from him. Heard about Judah Smith and all that. He is a good systems guy. The problem is his systems are attached to abuse. I don't think that's what he meant, but they've been attached to abuse. They've been attached to scandal. They've been attached to moral failure. So,
and again, we're seeking, I know you want to do another episode on this probably, but we're seeking other people's systems because why reinvent the wheel? I heard that from a pastor that crashed and burned. Why reinvent the wheel, when we can borrow other people's systems? Well, what about God? Because I'm pretty sure God has his systems. God has the wisdom for you and your ministry that he's given you to carry out by listening to what he has and to implement what he tells you to do. Sometimes that is grab this system and use a part of this, So sometimes you're piecing together these things, but we've got to be very careful when we do that. We've got to stay with God. We've got to stay.
Well, and to answer that question, sometimes the answer to the question, why do we need to reinvent the wheel? Because the wheel is broken and it's being used to run over people and hurt them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when that's the case, we got to reinvent the wheel.
Yep.
All right, Abby, and we'll finish up because I know Buck is having to leave to go somewhere right now. So we'll kind of finish this conversation together. But that's what week one is really all about. That's what step one is all about. And then at the end of step one, they talk about giving, right? Because giving is a big part of this. You got to get people giving. So they talk about the difference between tithes, offerings, and the gift of giving. Only they don't actually teach about the tithe. They use the principle of first fruits to talk about the tithe. We'll break this down further in another episode, but the things that they teach about in Growth Track, the things they teach about tithe and offerings, unless it's changed, is not biblically accurate. It's not, but it's to get people to not only give 10%, but to give above, okay? Above and beyond. And then they're kind of next steps from like week one. But no, when you look at the final list, what do we want to actually accomplish in week one? Here's the next steps they give you. Become a member of Church of the Highlands, join a small group, finish Growth Track, and get on the dream team. That's what they tell you. That's what we want you to do, which is become a member, join a small group, give, be a part of the dream team. We've talked about that a lot of different places. Those are the things that lead you to being a fully engaged part of the church. Okay. And then becoming a member, and we'll talk about this again, more detailed. I think we're going to have an episode with you and Buck where we just break this down in detail. What's good about it? What's concerning about it? But there's a membership covenant here. So, hey, stop. I should have realized that door was going to get him.
That's okay.
But they've got the membership covenant here. That's one of the last things they want you to do. They want you to sign it. And it starts with saying the very first thing that they're asking you to do is sign that you'll protect the unity of the church. And we know that protecting the unity of the church is often something that's been used to protect spiritual abuse, to hide scandal, to hide moral failure, to hide abuse of all kinds. So it concerns me that that's the very first thing that they say, right? And they use a lot of different scripture references. Those come from a lot of different translations. But they also sign that you're going to share the responsibility of your church, and you're going to serve in the ministry of your church and support the testimony of your church, right? So basically, the first thing you do before you go through anything else, you go through all that, you commit, I'm going to tithe, I'm going to do these things. By committing to do all these things, I'm signing a covenant that I'm going to do these things with you. And if I'm not doing these things, I'm not a good church member. Before you've really found out everything.
Right.
There's
Yeah.
good to membership covenants.
Yep.
There's bad to membership covenants. I would say this one, the way that it's written, could be used. I don't know if that's the way they meant it, but it could be easily used to control and manipulate people. Okay. When we move to step 2, okay, step 2 is all about discovering your design. It's all about discovering your design. Step 2, we talked about it, but it's you take a spiritual gifts test, and then you take some sort of leadership or talents test, the Enneagram, the DISC, the Myers-Briggs. Church of the Highlands uses DISC. So it actually, all it is you take you fill it out. They tell you what you are, what that means, and where are good places to serve with that DISC result. They do the same thing with spiritual gifts, right? And they show you with spiritual gifts, where's a good place to serve. And then step 3, after you get that, step 3 is they take all of that and they help you meet people on the different teams to use your spiritual gifts. You're supposed to be assigned to at least one place to serve that day. So the entire system, by the time you get done, and again, we'll break this down in more detail, it never really helps you discover your purpose or equips you to discover your purpose. It helps you find your spiritual gifts and uses world-made, man-made personality tests to help you discover that. The whole point, though, there are 3 really big points to this, okay? When you sign the membership covenant, that means you have to get in a small group, which helps us not only to get you engaged, but it helps with control. You have to sign and commit that you're going to give and tithe, okay, at least 10%, and you have to start serving. So by the time you get done with those, that's all that's really happened, but we told you it was going to help you discover your purpose. Now you feel good, you're doing this, it's increasing the bottom line, but it leads to people serving more and more and more because serving is good, serving is godly, serving makes God happy, serving makes my church happy.
Right. Now
We'll
we're
let them-
working. We're
yeah.
working for the gospel. We are and not working to serve the gospel, but we're working instead of the gospel.
In place of it.
In place of it. I mean, if one of the things that I'd put I don't post on social media very much at all, but I put something just because I was frustrated with the capital C church, and I put something out there. Everybody thought I was disgruntled with my own church, and I wasn't, but I was just with everything that's going on.
Yeah.
And with the comments that I got, it was very fascinating. But what I want to say is, when someone says, "Why do you like your church? Why do you go to your church?" or you think your church is awesome, you enjoy it. I mean, that's great. And then if somebody says, "Well, why?" and your reason is because I've found community, which again, all these things are good in and of themselves. All these things are good. I found community. I serve. The people I serve with are amazing. I mean, everything that these people were saying, I'm like, oh, Growth Track Church,
Yeah.
well, and we do this and together, and I'm in a small group, and it's great, and it just everything is great. What I don't hear is God. Jesus. Like, yes, you're around other people that might talk about Jesus and God, and not that that's what they all meant. I'm really not trying to put this blanket on it, but if somebody's talking about a church, let's talk about the first thing a church is for, and it's to point people to Jesus. But these people are not growing necessarily in relationship with Jesus. They're just excited about their church because they found friends that share the same worldview. I want friends that share the same worldview, so I want to do that. But that's not the purpose of church. We need to be pushed to Jesus and encouraged and Jesus.
And a lot of those small groups, and I've been a small groups pastor in these systems, a lot of those small groups are just doing fun things together. They're not taught how to disciple each other, right? So you have community, you do fun things together. You may even do a Bible study together, but you're not discipling one another. So you get to all the end of it. You get to the end of the book, and you finish Growth Track. You've been through the book. You filled in all the blanks. Yeah. And it gives you a QR code, and it says, here's your next step. At Highlands, we believe everyone has a next step in growing closer in their relationship with Jesus. So amen. We're going to show you how to grow closer in your relationship with Jesus. You now have the tools you need to take your next steps on your journey to know God, find freedom, discover purpose, and make a difference. Now, do you remember at the beginning of the book, in the beginning of Growth Track, they said, this is what our spiritual journey consists of. Yeah. Here they tell you to grow closer in your relationship with Jesus, we've given you all the tools.
All the tools
that you need. That's literally what it says.
You just need to take these assessments.
Yes. So here's what it was. To know God simply means that you're saved and baptized. That's what they're going to call knowing God. Finding freedom. they're going to talk, it's not listed here, but I know how it works in this system. Finding Freedom is about going to the Freedom Conference. And the Freedom Curriculum, Small Group, and Conference is fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah, you're right.
But it is just a part of Finding Freedom.
Right.
It's not Finding Freedom.
Right.
But that's what they mean by Finding Freedom for the most part. There's a system for it.
There is.
Okay? And it gets you more connected to the church, because when people go through Freedom, they really want to serve the church to help them find that freedom, because it's so fantastic, right? But Discovering Purpose, you just got it. Discovering Purpose was the DISC assessment and the gifts assessment. That was Discovering Purpose. But it's not. But that's what they said it was.
Right.
And then Making a Difference. Making a difference. We didn't talk about making a difference in your world, doing anything of that. Making a difference is two things. And this system,
Serving.
it's joining the dream team,
Yes.
which we're going to talk about in just a minute. That's the dream team means a serving area in this system, and doing things like serve days. So yes, we're serving inside and outside the church, but 98% of the weeks and days you're only serving inside the church. So why is this a narcissistic system? Because it's very insular toward building the bottom line and growing the church inside the walls. It doesn't actually fulfill the promises it makes of helping people discover their purpose or equipping them to know God and make a difference and do all of those things.
It's narcissistic because you can literally implement this system and leave God completely out of it. Whether
Yeah.
you do or not is up to your church. But
you could.
You could, and the system would still run and everything would look the
Yep.
same.
And then let's talk about this. The last thing I want to say, and then we'll land the plane for this episode. Here's another one of the markers. It's one of these narcissistic systems that works with Growth Track and all of that. It has become all the rage to call your volunteer team something other than volunteers. It's like calling people volunteers is bad. Okay. So the number one that is used is people just steal it from Highlands, because what you're going to look, if you look at a lot of growing churches, growing modern churches, they're either a part of ARC or they're using ARC systems. Okay. They're using Growth Track. They're using Freedom Conference, which again, I like Freedom. Okay.
Yeah.
I like all that. But what they're doing, they're calling them Dream Team. A lot of times it's join the Dream Team. I know of churches that call them other things. They've called them other things. So the church that I came out of, they call it Winning Teamers. You're part of the winning team. Now here's the problem though.
You're super Christian.
There's a ton of other ways to call this. But by calling your volunteer team something like the Dream Team, then basically what you're saying is, hey, you're either a part of the Dream Team or you're not.
Yeah.
You're either a part of the Christians in the in crowd or you're not. You're a part of the Christians who really please Jesus or the ones Jesus just puts up with. There's a dichotomy that is created. Everybody wants to be a part of the Dream Team. Why would I be a part of the crappy team if I could be a part of the Dream Team? Now, let's go to the other one. Let's go to the, and I'm just using this because this is the church that I went to that ran the system. They started calling them winning teamers. Join the winning team. Well, does that mean if I don't serve in your system, I'm a loser?
It does. It does.
I'm a loser Christian.
Yes.
If I don't serve in your
And
system.
you're not doing your purpose, and you're not fulfilling your destiny. You're not
living the
whatever.
dream. You're not winning.
You're
And
disobeying God, in fact.
So in churches like that, there's so many different like phrases we could use. But then since it's joining the winning team, winning becomes a part of everything they talk about, right? So if you're not a part of the system, if you're not doing it the way that they ask, if you're, so let's say I'm visiting this church. Well, if I'm going to stay at this church and I don't want to be a loser Christian, then my only option is to join the winning team, to go through Growth Track, next steps, get involved, serve, do all these things. Because if I'm not doing these things, I'm not a winning teamer. But guess what? I signed that membership covenant. So if I stop tithing or if I don't give enough, they kick me off the winning team. They kick me off the dream team. Oh, if I stop going to a small group because in this season, I'm dealing with other stuff and I need to be close to my family, I need to do all that. Okay, then I'm kicked off the winning team. If I stop serving for a season because something's going on, I'm kicked off the winning team because I'm not fulfilling this membership covenant. By the way, in this system, in these systems, your membership means nothing because you have no voice and you make no decisions. Traditionally, membership in a church means, yes, I have to do certain things to become a member because we make decisions for the church. We vote on things that are happening in the church. We vote on the next senior pastor. We vote if a pastor is going to be removed. But you saw from the governance structure in this system, the members don't do anything but give.
Right. Yes.
They don't do anything but give. They don't have any decision making. They're not a part of the decision making process. It is a one-sided covenant. I will give to you. I will protect you. I will serve you. I will do all these things, and you'll let me be a part of it. And we're okay with a one-sided covenant like that.
And to a certain degree, they're insulating
Yes.
the leadership. And that's what I'm seeing too from all of these fallen leaders and fallen organizations.
They had
and churches.
insular systems like this.
Insulated. And this is one way to insulate them. Oh, these people are so great. You know, we're practicing the unity of the church.
To be a part of the dream team, I have to sign this one-sided covenant. But you know what? I got to sign it because I don't want to be a part of the other team. I don't want to be a part of the losing team. I don't want to be a loser Christian that Jesus is upset with.
In this
I don't
church.
want to be alone.
Yeah.
Right? I want to be a part of this. And look, it's working for all of these tens of thousands of people. It must work for me. But then when you bring up, and again, I don't know about Church of the Highlands, but I know churches that have run this system. When someone does bring up something, they bring up allegations of spiritual abuse, they bring up moral issues, they're reminded, hey, our governance structure, one, will take care of that. And two, the first thing you said was you committed to protect the unity of the church. You need to stop talking about this. There's a process.
And don't post on it. Don't tell anybody.
What's the process? We'll handle it internally. And if our staff determines it needs to be held, we'll take it to the elders, that board of overseers. But guess what? The person who brought it, they have no responsibility in that. And if the staff doesn't take it, it doesn't go forward. So the biggest problem with these narcissistic systems is they put the focus on us. They put the focus on the church and the building of growth. They take the focus off of Jesus. They take the focus off of the Great Commission. They take the focus off of you living out your purpose, calling, ministry, the things you were equipped to do for the creation of the world outside of the church. But also, there's a lot of high control things going on here.
Yes.
And what is
Quality
another word?
control.
What is another word for a cult? It's high control environments. I am not saying that churches that use Growth Track and these other systems are cults, but what I am saying is there's a lot of high control things happening here that you would also find in cults. So there's just a lot of red flags. There are churches that have changed these systems to make them work, but if you don't change them, the way this is created, it is a bunch of huge red flags for me that at its worst, we've seen what happens at its worst. At its best, it probably can still work decently. But at its worst,
I don't even know if these things, I mean, I'm still, you would really have to sell me and show me somebody who has made these systems, even with their alterations, work in a way that is God focused, God first, and people second, and and that is set up just properly, and that truly cares about the people and are really
cares
pouring
about
into
the
the
truth,
people
cares about protection.
While these systems are in place, I would challenge anyone, listeners, add your comments in below and tell me do you think you're a part of a church where they have altered these or used these properly? I would love to know.
You've seen it used wrong so long.
I've not seen this be successful. I've not heard of it being successful. So if it is, please,
what we have seen though is at its worst, it's resulted and been tied to some of the worst scandals in modern church history. To a ton of spiritual abuse. That's why we're talking about it. But pastors, if you're a pastor who's listening and you would say, hey, Jeff, we do Growth Track different. We do these systems different. We do them in a God-honoring way that protects people, that protects the truth, that is not just insular, but it's really focused on the outside as well. Reach out. Yeah. Reach out. We want to hear about that. We want to be able to, if that's really happening, we want to be able to highlight people who are doing it because I don't have any examples. But I'm trying to be diplomatic enough to I believe that surely there are people who have done this, but we would love to see these examples. What we do know, though, is we know that the majority of churches we have seen who use these systems across the nation, bad things end up happening, right? So, and it's, again, this wasn't just about Growth Track. We're going to do a podcast just about Growth Track, okay? We're going to look at all this in depth because I know there's going to be a lot of questions about it, okay? And I'll probably try to reach out and see if we can get some other information. But all of this stuff comes directly from Church of the Highlands. But from the announcements we talked about to systems like this to the way we count numbers and metrics and pay people and all that, all of those narcissistic systems, they're narcissistic because they're focused on building the church, building the numbers, building inside the walls, and just like this governance structure, protecting the system. At all costs, whenever possible, protecting the system. There's a lot of good things. Most of the things we talked about are good in a vacuum. Okay. But when they're all done this way together, it becomes very narcissistic, and narcissistic systems Guys, narcissistic systems foster spiritual abuse, and often they foster a lot of other kinds of abuse. So,
And I think a lot of times the leadership might not see the abuse that's happening because there could be such a separation.
yeah,
So it's not that the leadership is like abusing people. Maybe that's happening within
Because of
the
the system.
system, and people don't, it's just not known.
Yeah.
People have no idea.
what the leaders are seeing is our church is growing and good things are happening, so this must be
Yeah.
godly. So again, if your church uses growth track, we're not telling you to leave. If your church uses these systems or does announcements these way, if you've seen these narcissistic systems in your church, we're not telling you to leave. And pastors, if these narcissistic systems are in your church, we're not telling you that you're a villain. We're not telling you that you're a narcissist. We're not telling you that you're a spiritual abuser. What we are saying is we have to ask questions because where these systems live long enough, abuse normally happens, right? So again, we just got to ask questions. We got to say, how can we continue to tweak these things, make them better? And sometimes we need to reinvent the wheel because it will work for church growth, but it's crushing people.
Yeah.
And when you look at the numbers right now, Christianity in America, like institutional Christianity, our churches are hemorrhaging people. There's a reason. Because there's a lot of people on the back end of these systems who have been exploited, who have been abused, who have been used. They're burnout. So we have to do something because people matter. So the kind of the call as we finish out this podcast, I think about what you want to leave the listener with. What I want to leave you with more than anything, though, is just, will you keep your eyes open in the church you go to? Will you keep your eyes open in the church that you visit? Not to bash people or anything else. Would you keep your eye out for narcissistic systems, and especially multiple narcissistic systems together? And if you see them, would you simply start conversations? Okay. And in governance structures like what we just talked about, you're probably not going to be able to get many answers. If that's the case, you may need to leave the church. Okay. But in a lot of these smaller churches that are using these systems, you will get answers. Let's just start conversations around this to make sure we're being the best that we can be. Because again, even if, Abby, even if just 1 out of every 10 churches, let's say 1 out of every 20, if 5% or less of the churches that use this system end up spiritually abusing people, okay, that's still too high. And that's what I hear from a lot of pastors when we're talking about this is that's just a small amount of churches. Well, from my experience, the numbers we've seen, and there's a lot of correlation that would say probably not, okay? It's going to take some more years and some more time for us to actually see what's happening with these young systems without it just being correlation. But even if it's just 5%, that's too much. Any system that results in 5% of its users spiritually abusing people or having scandal would be way too much. But again, all the data that we have right now would tell us it's probably a lot more than 5%. So again, and if you're a church leader who is looking and saying, Jeff, I get it. I see what you're talking about. I'm willing to have these conversations, but these systems have worked for my church. How can we tweak them? How in the world could we tweak them and make them better? Please reach out. We're not going to bash you. You're not going to be a story. We're not going to talk bad about you. We will help any pastor who reaches out to start asking the questions, not one size fits all, but in your context, in your community. How can you tweak these systems to get the good out of them while also protecting people, pointing toward Jesus, and it not becoming too insular or too narcissistic? So if you want help with that, please reach out. I'm not even telling you we have all the answers. What I am telling you is we'll partner with you to begin to ask those questions and try to find solutions.
Yeah. And if you're a part of a congregation or leadership that have seen these used well, give those ideas so that we can pass them out to people that are going, we've tried this and it's not quite worked. Because systems are important. They really are.
We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
We don't want to throw out all systems. We want to redeem these systems.
And we want to use God's systems. The last thing I want to say, I just feel like the number one thing right now, especially like right now in the way things are, is that we've got to stay with God. There is not a cookie cutter for anything. There is a specific call on every person. Every church has a specific call that God is wanting to do, and that might shift and change with the tide, but it's with God's tide and with the Spirit, is what I mean by that. But we've got to stay with God. We've got to stay grounded in the Scriptures and stay with God and stop trusting these maybe more appealing, easier systems that may look like they've worked for other people. in our stuff, unless God tells us to.
It takes faith to trust
risky.
God's plan for your church and not just use a cookie cutter system, but the faith is worth it.
Yeah.
Again, all the systems aren't bad, but if all the systems you're using come from somewhere else, then at some point, and I love the way Tim Ross says it. He says a lot of people are just trying to copy a system instead of praying for a blueprint.
Yes,
We
that's
need
good.
more pastors who are
good.
going to pray for a blueprint. But we'll come back. We're going to have an episode soon where we actually go down and break down the details of Growth Track. Because again, there's good pieces to Growth Track. We're going to break down the pieces of how it's designed, and we may actually give suggestions. I'm going to give this to you and Buck.
Great.
We'll give some suggestions of how we think churches could actually pivot and kind of redeem these systems. But Abby, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah.
Tell Buck thank you for his time. And I know we went over, but I think this is an incredible episode. So anyway, grateful for you, grateful for your heart for the church, and no matter who you are, where you're listening, whether we made you really mad today or not, I want you to know we love you, we're praying for you, and we're grateful that you listened with us all the way through this. And hey, even if you disagree, we hope that this is something that you can wrestle with, pray about, and our prayer is that God will give you wisdom and he'll show you exactly what you can do about it and how you can be a part of the solution exactly where you're at. So until we see you guys on the next episode of Church Disrupted, grace and peace.